Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story and others like it, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you possibly know. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review means the world to us and helps others discover these mysteries. And if you feel like it, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from across the globe. If you enjoy this content and want more stories like this, consider subscribing. Now, let's get into tonight's mystery. A massive thank you to Mittal Patel for suggesting this story. This one's for you. There are places on Earth where the ground itself whispers questions that history refuses to answer. In the spring of 2005, a man stood in a valley in Bosnia and Herzegovina, staring at something that shouldn't exist. Not there. Not shaped like that. Not aligned so perfectly with the cardinal points of our planet. The Visoko Valley had witnessed centuries of human history. Roman settlements, medieval fortresses, Ottoman occupation, the Yugoslav wars, layer upon layer of civilization, each one leaving its mark on the landscape. But beneath all of it, buried under soil and vegetation and the passage of countless generations, something else waited. The locals called it Vysočica Hill, a natural formation, a geological coincidence. Nothing more than compressed sediment and ancient stone shaped by millions of years of wind, water and time. Children played on its slopes. Farmers grazed livestock at its base. It was part of the landscape, unremarkable and familiar. But this man, standing at its base with a surveyor's eye and a researcher's curiosity, saw something different. He saw edges too sharp to be accidental, surfaces too flat to be random, angles too precise to be the work of erosion alone. Where everyone else saw a hill, he saw geometry. Where they saw nature, he saw intention. He saw 4 triangular faces rising from the earth like a monument deliberately placed. He saw corridors carved into bedrock, running for miles beneath the valley floor. He saw alignments that matched the great structures of Egypt, Mexico and China with impossible accuracy. He saw what he believed was the largest pyramid on Earth, buried and forgotten, older than any civilization in our textbooks, larger than Giza, older than Mesopotamia, hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. And when he announced his discovery to the world, he didn't just challenge geology, he challenged everything we think we know about who built what, when they built it, and what came before the history we've been taught. He challenged the timeline of human civilization. He challenged the idea that ancient Europeans were primitive, living in small tribes while Egypt and Mesopotamia flourished. He challenged the gatekeepers of accepted history, and they challenged him back. This is the story of the Bosnian pyramids, a mystery written in stone, a theory that refuses to die, a battle between belief and skepticism that continues to this day, and a question that still echoes through the Visoko Valley, unanswered and unsettling. What if the oldest civilization in Europe wasn't recorded in any book, but hidden beneath the ground we walk on? What if everything we've been taught about the progression of human development is missing a chapter? And what if that chapter was deliberately forgotten? Chapter 1. The Man Who Challenged History. Semir Osmanagic was not supposed to change archaeology. He was a businessman, an author, a man with degrees in political science and metallurgy, not ancient history. He had built a successful life in Houston, Texas, far from the land of his birth. He owned companies, he wrote books, he lived comfortably in the practical world of commerce and industry. But he had always been drawn to mysteries. For years he had travelled the world studying ancient civilizations. He visited pyramids in Egypt, standing in the shadow of Giza and feeling the weight of millennia pressing down on the sand. He explored the stepped temples of Mexico, climbing the pyramids of Teotihuacan and wondering about the people who built them without metal tools or the wheel. He trekked through Peru, examining the precise stonework of Machu Picchu and the massive blocks of Sacsayhuaman, fitted together so perfectly that a knife blade couldn't slip between them. He travelled to China, documenting the pyramids there that few Westerners even knew existed. And everywhere he went he saw patterns, the same architectural principles, the same astronomical alignments, the same massive scale and impossible precision, cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all building the same thing. He wrote books proposing that these similarities were not coincidental, that ancient civilizations were connected by knowledge we'd lost, that human history was deeper and stranger than the textbooks admitted. His books were popular in certain circles, controversial in others. Mainstream archaeology dismissed him as a fringe theorist, someone who saw connections that weren't there and ignored evidence that contradicted his views. He was used to skepticism. But in 2005, when he returned to his homeland of Bosnia and Herzegovina after years abroad, something changed. He wasn't visiting ancient ruins this time. He was just driving home. It was supposed to be a simple trip through the Visoko Valley, about 20 miles northwest of Sarajevo. A quiet agricultural region, known for its medieval fortress and leather industry. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would appear in guidebooks or attract tourists. But as he drove, something caught his attention. The hills, specifically their shape. Osmanagic had spent enough time looking at pyramids to recognise certain characteristics. Most hills are irregular, rounded by erosion over millions of years, asymmetric, chaotic in their contours, no two sides the same. These were not. Visočica Hill rose from the valley floor with 4 distinct faces, each one angled, each one sloping at what appeared to be a consistent grade. The summit formed a flattened plateau, not a rounded peak. The sides descended in clean geometric lines toward the base. From a distance, it looked like a pyramid. A massive pyramid covered in earth and vegetation, but a pyramid nonetheless. Osmanagic pulled over. He got out of his car and stood at the side of the road, staring up at the formation. Other drivers passed by, locals who'd seen the hill their entire lives and never thought twice about it. But Osmanagic couldn't look away. He walked closer. He circled the base, noting the angles, the orientation, the way the faces aligned with the cardinal directions. He made sketches in a notebook. He took photographs from different positions. And the more he looked, the more convinced he became. This wasn't a hill. It was a structure. Over the following weeks, he returned again and again. He brought surveying equipment. He took measurements. He compared the angles to pyramids he'd studied in Egypt and Mexico. The slope angles averaged at around 45 degrees, the same angle used in many ancient pyramids. The faces pointed north, south, east, and west with remarkable precision. The same cardinal alignment found at Giza. He measured the base dimensions. If this was indeed a pyramid, it would be enormous, over 12,000 feet along each side, larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, larger than any structure built by ancient humans, the largest pyramid on Earth, hidden in Bosnia. Osmanagic knew what he was suggesting was extraordinary. He knew the implications. He knew the response he would get. But he also knew he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. In October of 2005, he held a press conference. Media from across Bosnia attended, curious about what this businessman turned researcher was claiming. He stood before them and made his announcement. Visočica Hill was not a hill at all. It was a pyramid. He called it the Pyramid of the Sun, and he claimed it could be older, much older, than the pyramids of Egypt. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some people laughed, dismissing it as pseudoscience or a publicity stunt. Others were intrigued, excited by the possibility that Bosnia might hold secrets worthy of global attention. The local government saw opportunity, tourism, international interest, a chance to put Visoko on the map and bring money to a region still recovering from the devastation of war. They gave Osmanagic permission to excavate. Within months, volunteers from around the world descended on the valley. Archaeologists, engineers, geologists, and curious believers with shovels and enthusiasm. Cameras arrived, documentaries were filmed. Journalists from major publications flew in to cover the story. The small valley town of Visoko, population 20,000, became the centre of a global controversy. But the controversy didn't start with Osmanagic's announcement. It started with what his team found when they began to dig. Chapter 2. The measurements that raised eyebrows. From the very beginning, Osmanagic understood that belief alone wouldn't convince anyone. He needed data, numbers, measurements that could be verified and reproduced. Subjective interpretation wouldn't be enough. He needed objective evidence that could stand up to scientific scrutiny, so his team brought in professionals, surveyors with decades of experience in topographical mapping, civil engineers who understood structural analysis, geologists who could differentiate between natural formations and artificial construction. They used laser theodolites to measure angles with precision down to fractions of a degree. They employed satellite imaging to map the overall structure from above. They used ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the surface without disturbing the soil. What they found was difficult to dismiss. The slope angles of the hill's four faces measured consistently around 45 degrees. Not exactly uniform across every inch of surface, but far more regular than what natural erosion typically produces. In nature, hills erode unevenly. Water carves gullies, wind shapes ridges. One side weathers faster than another depending on sun exposure and prevailing weather patterns. But all four faces of Vysotsika showed similar angles of inclination. The orientation of the structure was even more striking. Using magnetic compasses and GPS coordinates, the team determined that the four faces aligned almost perfectly with true north, south, east, and west. Not magnetic north, which shifts over time and varies by location, but true north, the axis around which Earth rotates. Cardinal alignment, the same kind of precision found at the Great Pyramid of Giza, which points north with an error of less than 1/10 of a degree. The same alignment used at the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico, where the Avenue of the Dead runs precisely 15 1/2 degrees east of north, matching the orientation of the setting Pleiades constellation. Ancient builders across the world had encoded astronomical knowledge into their monuments. They had aligned their structures with celestial phenomena, creating buildings that functioned as calendars, observatories, and ritual spaces tied to the movements of stars and planets. If Vysotsika was artificial, it fit that pattern perfectly. Osmanagic's team also measured the base dimensions. Using GPS mapping and aerial photography, they calculated the footprint of the structure. The numbers were staggering. If this was indeed a pyramid, each side measured approximately 12,000 feet from corner to corner. That's over 2 miles per side. Footprint covering roughly 75 acres. For comparison, the Great Pyramid of Giza has a base measuring 756 feet per side. Vysotsika, if artificial, would be nearly 16 times larger along each edge. The volume of such a structure would be almost incomprehensible. Millions of cubic meters of stone and earth, shaped and positioned with geometric precision. If humans built this, it would represent an engineering achievement beyond anything in recorded history. But there was a problem. A big problem. Geology. Geologists examining the hill identified it as a formation composed of layered conglomerate rock, sandstone, and claystone, the kind of sedimentary deposit common in river valleys and ancient lake beds. Material that forms naturally when rivers carry sediment downstream, depositing it in layers over millions of years. The rock wasn't quarried granite or limestone. It wasn't shaped blocks fitted together. It was layered sediment, compressed, and hardened into stone by geological processes. They argued that the triangular shape, while unusual, could be explained by natural processes. Tectonic uplift pushing the formation upward at an angle. Differential erosion, where softer layers weather away faster than harder ones, creating flat faces along natural cleavage planes in the rock. They pointed to other hills around the world with vaguely pyramidal shapes. The Devil's Tower in Wyoming, the Matterhorn in Switzerland, Sugarloaf Mountain in Brazil. None of them are considered man-made. Nature can create geometry, they argued. Given enough time and the right conditions, erosion can produce shapes that look intentional, but are entirely random. But Osmanagic supporters countered with their own evidence. They pointed to the flatness of the faces, the consistency of the angles across all four sides, the precision of the cardinal alignment, which they argued couldn't be explained by random geological processes. They brought in geophysicists who used seismic testing to map the internal structure of the hill. The results showed distinct layers of material, some harder than others, arranged in patterns that looked more like construction layers than natural sediment. They found areas where the surface appeared to be covered with something resembling concrete blocks. Not modern concrete, but an ancient form of building material, harder than the surrounding stone. Samples were taken and analysed. The material contained a mixture of crushed stone and binding agents, similar to ancient Roman concrete or the geopolymer concrete theorised to have been used in pyramid construction. But critics dismissed these findings as well. They argued that natural minerals could create similar compounds, that what looked like artificial concrete might just be mineralisation, a natural process where groundwater deposits minerals that cement loose material into solid rock. The debate intensified. Each side brought more experts, more tests, more data. And through it all, the hill remained unchanged, silent, waiting for someone to prove definitively what it was. But then Osmanagit's team found something that couldn't be explained by geology alone, something that suggested intelligence, design, purpose. They found what lay beneath. Chapter 3. The Underground Tunnels. If the pyramid theory rested only on the shape of the hill, it might have faded into obscurity. Unusual geology, interesting measurements, but ultimately inconclusive. But then they found the tunnels, and everything changed. Just outside Visoko, buried beneath fields and forest, a network of underground passages had been known to locals for generations. They called them the Ravne Tunnels, named after the nearby Ravne neighbourhood. Old-timers remembered exploring them as children, crawling into dark openings in the hillside, following passages that seemed to go on forever. Most people assumed they were old mining shafts, medieval tunnels dug centuries ago to extract iron ore or clay, long abandoned and partially collapsed, filled with rubble and groundwater. Nobody paid much attention to them, until Osmanagit's team began clearing them. What they uncovered was far more extensive than anyone expected. The tunnels stretched for miles beneath the valley, not just a single shaft, but an intricate network of interconnected passages, chambers and corridors. Some ran straight for hundreds of feet, others branched and turned, creating a labyrinth beneath the earth. The main passage was tall enough to walk through upright, 7 feet high in places, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. The floor was relatively level, though covered in centuries of sediment that had washed in from collapsed sections. Other passages required crawling, narrow shafts that wound through the bedrock, carved or formed through processes no one could immediately identify. But what struck the excavators wasn't just the size of the tunnel system. It was the condition. The walls were dry. In underground passages, especially those running through sedimentary rock, you expect seepage. Groundwater percolating through cracks, moisture condensing on stone surfaces, dampness and mould and the constant drip of water. But these tunnels were remarkably dry. The walls in some sections appeared to have been deliberately carved or smoothed. Not rough and irregular like natural caves, but with surfaces that showed signs of tool marks or deliberate shaping. The ceiling in some chambers formed gentle arches, not sharp angles, but curves that distributed weight and pressure in ways that prevented collapse. And then there were the objects they found inside. Stone blocks, large rectangular slabs of a material different from the surrounding bedrock. Some weighed several tons. They were positioned throughout the tunnels, sometimes blocking passages, sometimes stacked along the walls. The blocks weren't rough, chunks of broken stone. They had defined edges, flat surfaces, uniform dimensions. Osmanagit's team examined them closely. The material appeared to be a type of conglomerate, harder and denser than the surrounding rock. But the way it was shaped, the uniformity of the blocks, suggested they had been cut or moulded rather than naturally formed. They found ceramic artefacts as well, fragments of pottery scattered through the sediment. But the styles didn't match known medieval pottery from the region. The forms were different. The clay composition was unusual. Some pieces were sent to laboratories for thermoluminescence dating, a technique that measures when ceramic materials were last fired. The results came back suggesting dates far older than the medieval period. And then there were the symbols, carved into the stone walls, etched into some of the blocks, geometric shapes, lines radiating from central points, patterns that resembled no known alphabet or decorative style from Bosnian history. Were they writing, mathematical notations, astronomical charts, religious symbols? Nobody knew. They didn't match Cyrillic or Latin scripts. They didn't resemble runes or Ogham or any European writing system. They looked ancient, purposeful. But their meaning was lost. Osmanagic proposed that the tunnels were not mines. They were access corridors, built by whoever constructed the pyramid above, perhaps to transport materials during construction, perhaps to serve a ceremonial function, connecting sacred spaces beneath the earth, perhaps to house treasuries or burial chambers that had long since been emptied or destroyed. He suggested that the tunnels might connect multiple pyramid structures across the valley, that what they were finding was just one part of a larger complex, an underground city or temple system, linking monument to monument. Critics argued otherwise. They suggested the tunnels were exactly what they appeared to be at first glance: medieval, mining tunnels dug centuries ago to extract ore or clay. The stone blocks could be natural formations that broke along cleavage plains, creating rectangular shapes without human intervention. The symbols could be scratches left by tools or markings made by miners indicating direction or ownership. The dry condition of the tunnels, they said, was due to the type of rock. The arched ceilings were natural formations where softer material had eroded away, leaving harder stone intact in curved shapes. Everything could be explained without invoking ancient pyramid builders. But the excavation team pressed forward. They cleared more passages. They mapped the network. They documented every symbol, every block, every artifact they found. And the question remained unanswered. If these were just old mines, why were they sealed? Why were they forgotten? And why did some sections appear to lead directly toward the base of the pyramid hill? The debate grew louder, more heated, more polarized. But one fact was undeniable. There was something beneath the valley, something old, something unexplained, and whatever it was, it had been there long before anyone currently alive. Chapter 4. The Energy Anomaly. Osmanagic was not content to argue geometry and geology. He wanted to explore a different possibility, one that would take the pyramid theory in a direction most mainstream archaeologists refused to consider. What if the pyramids weren't built as tombs or monuments to kings? What if they were machines? It's a theory that had circulated in alternative archaeology circles for decades. The idea that ancient civilizations understood energy in ways we've lost, that they built structures not just to honour gods or bury rulers, but to harness natural forces, to generate power, to communicate across vast distances. Nikola Tesla, a Serbian-American inventor, had proposed something similar in the early 20th century. He believed that pyramids, particularly the Great Pyramid of Giza, might have functioned as wireless power transmission stations, that their geometric properties and internal chambers could resonate at specific frequencies, channeling energy through the Earth itself. Tesla died before he could prove his theories. His notes on wireless energy transmission were seized by government agencies and classified. The technology, if it existed, was never fully developed or publicly revealed. But Osmanagic wondered, what if Tesla was right? What if the ancients had figured out something we're only beginning to rediscover? His team brought in researchers with electromagnetic detection equipment, engineers who specialised in frequency analysis, physicists willing to take measurements that most of their colleagues would consider pseudoscientific nonsense. They scanned the summit of the Pyramid of the Sun, looking for anything unusual, and they found something. According to their instruments, there was a concentrated electromagnetic frequency being emitted from the top of the hill, not a broad, diffuse signal like you'd get from natural background radiation, but a focused beam of energy pointing upward into the sky. The frequency measured at 28 kilohertz, a specific repeating signal, consistent, measurable, reproducible. The team took readings at different times of day, in different weather conditions, during different seasons. The signal remained. They moved their equipment to different locations around the summit. The strongest readings came from the highest point of the hill. The signal weakened as they descended the slopes. Osmanagic and his supporters theorized that the pyramid was designed to generate or channel this energy, that its geometric shape, its internal structure and its material composition were all engineered to create a resonant cavity, a chamber that could amplify natural electromagnetic frequencies and project them outward, perhaps as a form of wireless power transmission, beaming energy to other locations without wires or transmission lines, perhaps as a communication device, sending signals to other pyramids in a global network, perhaps as a healing technology, using specific frequencies to affect biological processes in ways we're only beginning to understand. They compared their findings to research on pyramid power, a controversial field that studies the supposed energetic properties of pyramidal structures. Some studies have claimed that objects placed inside pyramids experience unusual effects. Food stays fresh longer, metals resist corrosion, plants grow faster, water changes its molecular structure. Mainstream science dismisses most of this research as pseudoscience, poorly controlled experiments, and wishful thinking. But Osmanagic's team argued that the dismissal came too easily, that established science had a history of rejecting phenomena it couldn't immediately explain, only to accept them decades later when better. Technology made measurement possible. They pointed to examples. Ball lightning dismissed as folklore until high-speed cameras captured it. Meteorites, which scientists insisted didn't exist until so many fell that denial became impossible. Continental drift, ridiculed for decades before plate tectonics became accepted theory. What if pyramid energy was the same, real but unmeasurable with current scientific instruments, or measurable but ignored because it contradicted materialist assumptions about how the universe works? Mainstream scientists were skeptical, deeply skeptical. They pointed out that electromagnetic readings can be affected by dozens of factors. Underground water, which conducts electricity and can create localized electromagnetic fields. Mineral deposits in the rock, particularly iron and magnetite, which can generate their own magnetic signatures. Modern interference from nearby electrical infrastructure, cell towers, power lines, all of which emit electromagnetic radiation. The signal could be a natural phenomenon, groundwater flowing through iron-rich rock, creating a natural battery effect. Piezoelectric activity, where pressure on quartz crystals in the stone generates small electrical charges. It could be measurement error, faulty instruments, operator bias, confirmation bias, where researchers see what they expect to see and ignore data that contradicts their hypothesis. It could be deliberate fraud, someone placing electrical devices at the summit to generate false readings. Though no one suggested Osmanagic himself was perpetrating fraud, the possibility of deception by others involved in the project couldn't be entirely ruled out. But the readings persisted. Other researchers visited the site with their own equipment. Some reported similar findings. They measured electromagnetic frequencies, ultrasound emissions, and ionization patterns that seemed unusual for a natural hill. Others found nothing. Their instruments showed only background radiation. Normal geological activity, nothing that couldn't be explained by conventional science. The energy question became another layer of the mystery. Because if the pyramid was emitting something, intentionally or not, it suggested the structure was more than decorative, more than a tomb, more than a monument built to impress or intimidate. It suggested purpose, function, engineering, and purpose implies design, and design implies intelligence, and intelligence 25,000 years ago implies everything we think we know about human history might be wrong. Chapter 5. The Age Problem. The controversy over the Bosnian pyramids took a sharper, more dangerous turn when Osmanagic's team began carbon dating material from the tunnels. Age was everything. If the structures were medieval, they were interesting but not revolutionary. Bosnia has a rich history of medieval fortifications, mines and settlements. Adding another site to that list would be noteworthy but wouldn't change our understanding of human civilization. If the structures were Roman or older, that would be significant. It would suggest that advanced engineering and monumental construction reached the Balkans earlier than currently believed. But if the structures were truly ancient, predating known European civilizations by thousands of years, it would shatter accepted timelines. It would prove that advanced cultures existed in Europe during periods when archaeologists insist only primitive hunter-gatherers roamed the continent. So the dating mattered enormously. Osmanagic's team collected organic material from multiple locations. Fragments of wood found embedded in stone blocks in the tunnels, charcoal deposits from sealed chambers, soil samples from layers beneath the pyramid's surface that hadn't been disturbed since they were deposited. They sent samples to multiple laboratories, reputable facilities with established reputations for accurate radiocarbon dating. They wanted results that couldn't be easily dismissed as amateur errors or contaminated samples. The results came back, and they were stunning. Some samples dated to around 5,000 years ago, roughly contemporaneous with early dynastic Egypt and the first cities of Mesopotamia. Significant, but not revolutionary. Other samples went further back, 10,000 years, 12,000 years. Deep into the period archaeologists call the Neolithic, when humans were supposedly just beginning to transition from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agriculture. And some samples pushed even older, 15,000 years, 20,000 years, 25,000 years. If accurate, this would place human activity at the site during the last glacial maximum, when ice sheets covered much of Europe and sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than today. During a period when, according to conventional archaeology, no civilization existed anywhere on Earth. When humans lived in small nomadic bands, hunting megafauna and gathering wild plants, with no permanent settlements, no agriculture, no monumental architecture, no pyramids. Osmanagic embraced the results with the fervour of a man vindicated. He argued that the pyramids were evidence of a lost civilization, one that existed before the great cataclysms that ended the Ice Age. A culture erased by rising sea levels, climate shifts, and geological upheaval when the glaciers melted and the world transformed. He suggested that survivors of this civilization might have spread across the world, carrying knowledge of pyramid construction to Egypt, Mesoamerica and Asia. That the global presence of pyramids wasn't convergent evolution or independent invention, but inherited memory. Ancient refugees teaching their descendants how to build in stone, how to align structures with the stars, how to encode knowledge in geometry. The lost civilization hypothesis had been proposed before by writers like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval. The idea that an advanced Ice Age culture existed and was destroyed by catastrophe around 12,000 years ago, leaving only myths, legends, and scattered stone monuments as evidence of its existence. Mainstream archaeology had dismissed these ideas as speculative fantasy, interesting stories, but unsupported by hard evidence. Now Osmanagic was offering dates that seemed to support exactly that scenario. But critics attacked the dating methods with equal fervour. They argued that organic material found near a structure doesn't prove the structure's age. Carbon dating tells you when a piece of wood or charcoal died, not when it was incorporated into construction. Wood fragments could have washed into the tunnels from surface erosion thousands of years after the tunnels were carved. Charcoal could be from fires set by medieval miners, or even earlier inhabitants using the tunnels as shelter. Soil samples could contain ancient, organic material that had nothing to do with pyramid construction. Contamination was always a risk. Groundwater percolating through rock could carry dissolved organic compounds from one layer to another, mixing materials of different ages and producing misleading dates. They pointed out that no artifacts had been found that definitively matched the proposed timeline. No tools specifically designed for quarrying or shaping massive stone blocks. No inscriptions, no burials, no human remains from 25,000 years ago directly associated with construction activity. Without those corroborating finds, the carbon dates were suggestive but not conclusive. Some critics went further, suggesting that Osmanagic was deliberately cherry-picking dates that supported his theory while ignoring samples that contradicted it. That medieval dates were being dismissed while anomalously old dates were being highlighted. Osmanagic denied this. He insisted all dates were being reported, that The range of ages suggested a complex history of use and reuse over many millennia, that both medieval miners and much earlier builders had left their marks on the site. Independent researchers visited and conducted their own dating studies. Some confirmed similar age ranges, others found only more recent dates consistent with medieval activity. The debate became increasingly technical. Arguments over calibration curves, contamination protocols, statistical confidence intervals, the kind of specialised discussion that left most people confused and frustrated. But beneath the technical arguments, a simpler question remained. If the Bosnian pyramids are really 25,000 years old, where is everything else? Where are the settlements, the pottery, the tools, the bones of the people who would have built such structures? Proponents argued that sea level rise and climate change could have destroyed most evidence, that the builders might have lived in coastal regions now, underwater, that wood, rope, and organic tools wouldn't survive 25 millennia. Critics argued that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it's also not evidence of presence. That extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and the dating results, however intriguing, weren't enough on their own. The age question remained unsettled, but one fact was undeniable. The dates existed, recorded in laboratory reports, published in journals and conference proceedings. 25,000 years, numbers that refused to disappear no matter how loudly anyone objected. Chapter 6. Academic Backlash. By 2006, the Bosnian Pyramid project had attracted international attention. It had also attracted fury. The European Association of Archaeologists issued a formal statement condemning the excavations. They called the pyramid claims pseudoscience. They accused Osmanagic of damaging legitimate archaeological sites in the area, including medieval ruins, that were being disturbed by digging. Archaeologists from universities across Europe signed petitions demanding that the Bosnian government halt the project. They argued that promoting the pyramid theory was harmful to the country's credibility and to the discipline of archaeology itself. One prominent archaeologist called it the greatest hoax in archaeological history. Another compared it to ancient alien theories, dismissing it as entertainment masquerading as research. The criticism was personal, harsh, unyielding. Osmanagic responded by accusing the academic establishment of gatekeeping. He claimed that traditional archaeologists were protecting outdated narratives and refusing to investigate evidence that contradicted their models. He argued that institutional archaeology had a history of dismissing discoveries that didn't fit accepted timelines. That paradigm shifts only happened when enough pressure forced them to. He invited critics to visit the site, to examine the data themselves, to propose alternative explanations. Few accepted. The divide deepened. On one side, established science, defending the integrity of archaeological method. On the other, independent researchers, volunteers, and believers, insisting that something extraordinary was being ignored, and in the middle, the pyramids themselves, silent and unchanged, waiting for someone to prove what they truly were. Chapter 7. Why the Theory Won't Die. Most controversial archaeological claims fade. They burn bright for a moment, attracting media attention and passionate believers. Then the evidence fails to materialize. Funding dries up, public interest moves on, the claims are forgotten, relegated to footnotes in the history of fringe science. The Bosnian pyramids did not fade. Nearly 2 decades after Osmanagic's first announcement, excavations continue. Not at the frenetic pace of the early years, but steady, persistent, refusing to stop. Volunteers still arrive from across the globe, Europeans on summer holiday, Americans taking sabbaticals from careers in engineering and medicine, retirees with time and curiosity, young people searching for meaning in a world that often feels devoid of mystery. They come to dig, to explore the tunnels, to take measurements, to be part of something they believe is significant. Tourists visit Visoko by the thousands each year. The town has built an infrastructure around the pyramids, hotels, restaurants, tour guides who lead groups up the paths to the summit, explaining the theory, pointing out the geometric features, selling books and documentaries about the lost civilization hypothesis. The local economy has benefited. Jobs have been created. International attention has brought investment. Whether the pyramids are real or not, they've become real for the town's prosperity. The site has become something unique in archaeology, something that exists in a liminal space between accepted science and rejected. Pseudoscience, part archaeological dig, part spiritual pilgrimage, part conspiracy hotspot. People come because they believe in lost knowledge, in ancient wisdom, in the possibility that everything they were taught about history is incomplete or deliberately misleading. Others come because they're curious. They've heard the claims, seen the documentaries, read the books. They want to judge for themselves, to walk the tunnels, to feel the stone, to decide whether this is genius or madness. Some come because they want to challenge what they've been taught. They're tired of being told what to think by institutions they don't trust. Academia, government, media, the gatekeepers of official knowledge. The pyramids offer an alternative narrative, a story where official history might be wrong, where mainstream experts might be protecting their own authority rather than pursuing truth. That appeals to people, especially in an age where trust in institutions has eroded, where alternative information is easily accessible, where anyone with internet access can research topics that used to be controlled by academic specialists. The pyramid complex has expanded beyond the original Vysochika hill. Osmanagit's team has identified what they call the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Dragon, the Pyramid of Love, and the Pyramid of the Earth. 5 major structures, they claim, arranged in a geometric pattern across the valley. Each one shows similar features to the Pyramid of the Sun: triangular faces, cardinal alignment, tunnels beneath or nearby, materials that might be ancient concrete. Critics dismiss all of them as natural hills. The same geological processes that could explain Vysochika, they argue, apply equally to the other formations. But the believers keep finding patterns, alignments between pyramid peaks that match astronomical phenomena, measurements that encode mathematical constants, geometric relationships that seem too precise to be accidental. Independent researchers conduct their own studies. Some support the pyramid hypothesis, publishing papers in alternative archaeology journals. Others remain neutral, acknowledging unusual features while refusing to commit to any conclusion. A few actively work to debunk the claims, visiting the site to gather evidence of natural formation. But the work continues regardless. Cameras document every new excavation. YouTube channels dedicated to ancient mysteries feature regular updates from Visoko. Podcasts interview Osmanagich and his team. Social media groups share theories, photographs, and speculative connections to other ancient sites. The digital age has amplified the pyramid story in ways that wouldn't have been possible in earlier decades. Information spreads instantly. Evidence, or what proponents call evidence, reaches millions of people without passing through traditional media gatekeepers. The question lingers, persistent and unanswered. If it's just a hill, why does it generate so much attention? Why do established scientists get so angry at the suggestion? Why does mere mention of the Bosnian pyramids trigger such visceral responses from mainstream archaeologists? Supporters argue it's because the evidence, while disputed, is compelling enough to warrant serious investigation. That the alignments, the tunnels, the measurements, and the energy readings form a pattern that can't be entirely dismissed as coincidence or delusion. That mainstream archaeology's refusal to engage, its tendency to ridicule rather than investigate, reveals something about the politics of knowledge, about who gets to decide what's real and what's not. Critics argue it's because people want to believe in lost civilizations, that the human mind is drawn to mystery and meaning, even when the simplest explanation is the truth. That conspiracy thinking offers psychological comfort, a sense of hidden knowledge, a feeling of being special by knowing what others don't. That entertaining obviously false claims wastes resources and damages the credibility of real archaeological work. Both might be right. Both might be missing something. But neither side has definitively proven the other wrong, and so the pyramids remain, neither fully accepted nor fully debunked, existing in the space between proof and faith, waiting. Chapter 8. The Lost Civilization Hypothesis. The Bosnian pyramids are not alone. Around the world there are structures that don't fit neatly into accepted timelines. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. The massive stone temple complex dated to over 11,000 years ago, built by people who supposedly hadn't yet invented agriculture or writing. The Sphinx in Egypt. Some researchers argue its weathering patterns suggest it's far older than traditionally believed, possibly predating dynastic Egypt by thousands of years. Underwater structures off the coast of Japan, India and Cuba. Stone formations that resemble roads. Walls and platforms submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. The Bosnian pyramids fit into a larger theory, the idea that a technologically advanced civilization existed before recorded history, that it flourished during the Ice Age, when sea levels were lower and much of what is now underwater was dry land, that this civilization built monumental structures across the globe, pyramids, temples, observatories, networks of knowledge encoded in stone, and that it was erased by catastrophe, floods, earthquakes, climate collapse, events so devastating that only fragments of the culture survived, carried forward by scattered groups who passed down stories of a time before, a golden age now lost. There is no definitive proof of this civilization, but there are unsettling parallels. Pyramid structures on every inhabited continent, built by cultures with no known contact, using similar mathematical ratios, aligned to the same celestial markers. Flood myths in nearly every ancient culture. Stories of a great deluge that wiped out an earlier world. Advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics and engineering appearing suddenly in ancient societies with no clear developmental path. The theory asks, what if history didn't begin 5,000 years ago in Sumerian Egypt? What if it began much earlier, and we've simply lost the chapters that came before? Chapter 9. Silence, ridicule, and control. One of the recurring themes in the Bosnian pyramid story is the nature of the opposition. It's not just disagreement, it's active suppression. Media coverage of the pyramids often takes a mocking tone. Headlines frame the story as a joke. Documentaries focus on the controversy rather than the evidence. Funding for the project comes almost entirely from private donations and tourism. No major academic institution has offered support. Grants are denied. Applications for official recognition are ignored. Osmanagit's requests for collaborative research with established universities have been repeatedly refused. Critics say this is because the theory lacks merit, that no serious institution would waste resources on something so clearly disproven. But supporters see something else. They see a pattern of gatekeeping, a refusal to engage with evidence that challenges accepted narratives, a tendency to ridicule rather than investigate. They ask, if the pyramids are natural, why not study them and prove it conclusively? Why not send a team of geologists to map the site, run comprehensive tests, and publish definitive findings? Why not carbon date the organic material independently and settle the age question once and for all? Instead, the response has been dismissal, public condemnation, warnings to stay away. The conspiracy interpretation suggests that establishment institutions protect their authority by controlling the narrative, that acknowledging the pyramids as real would force a rewrite of history, undermining decades of academic work and threatening the credibility of entire fields. That curiosity is discouraged because curiosity leads to questions, and questions lead to doubt. Whether this interpretation is accurate or not, the result is the same. The pyramids remain in limbo, not proven, not disproven, officially ignored, and the people who believe in them continue to dig. Epilogue. The hills still stand. 2 decades have passed since Emir Osmanagic first looked at Visočica Hill and saw a pyramid. The hill is still there. The tunnels are still being cleared. The measurements are still recorded. The energy readings persist. And the debate continues. No government body has officially recognised the pyramids as man-made. No major archaeological institution has endorsed the theory. The site remains outside the boundaries of accepted history. But it also hasn't been definitively disproven. Geologists can explain the shape as natural, but they can't explain every detail. The alignments, the tunnels, the stone blocks, the carbon dates. Osmanagic and his team continue their work, slower now, with less media attention but no less conviction. They believe they are uncovering proof of a forgotten chapter of human history, a civilization that built in stone, understood energy, and left traces across the world before vanishing into myth. Their critics believe they are chasing illusions, seeing patterns in randomness, bending evidence to fit a desired conclusion. Both sides claim to stand for truth, but the truth, as it often does, remains elusive. Because here is what we know for certain. There is a hill in Bosnia shaped like a pyramid. There are tunnels beneath it that no one can fully explain. There are measurements that align with ancient structures across the world. There are dates that suggest the site is older than it should be. And there are people who refuse to stop asking questions. If the hills are natural, time and science will eventually prove it beyond doubt. If they are not, history will have to change. Until then, the Valley of Stone Giants remains what it has always been. A mystery written in stone, a question without an answer, and a reminder that the ground beneath our feet may hold secrets we've only begun to understand. The pyramids are still there, waiting, silent, unchanged, and the people who seek the truth continue to dig. Before we begin tonight's investigation, if you're enjoying this content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It truly helps the channel grow more than you could possibly know, and we're incredibly grateful for your support. Also, if you'd like, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from across the globe. Now let's dive into tonight's story. A massive thank you to Know Thyself for suggesting tonight's investigation. This one goes deep. Project Bluebeam, the activation file. There are conspiracy theories, and then there are conspiracy theories built on foundations so solid, so verifiable, that calling them theories starts to feel uncomfortable. What you're about to hear isn't fiction dressed up as fact. It's fact dressed up as something we desperately want to remain fiction. In January of the year following the most divisive election in modern American history, a reporter in Montreal opened a box that had been sitting in a storage unit for 20 years. Inside that box was evidence of a program that, according to official records, never existed. According to the people who worked on it, it was never supposed to be discovered. And according to the timeline documented within those papers, it was already too late to stop what was coming. This is the story of Project Bluebeam. Not the internet legend, not the wild speculation, the documented version. The one with names, dates, programs and technology that all check out when you start pulling the threads. The one that makes you wonder why we were ever allowed to know about it at all. Part 1. The file that shouldn't exist. Daniel Rousseau wasn't looking for a conspiracy when he inherited the box. He was a local news reporter for a small independent paper in Montreal, the kind of journalist who covered city council meetings and restaurant openings. At 38 years old, he'd long ago abandoned the idealistic dreams of investigative journalism that had driven him in his 20s. He paid his bills, wrote his assigned stories, and went home to his apartment overlooking Rue Saint-Denis. His Aunt Claire had passed away in late December, just after Christmas. She'd been his favourite relative growing up, a librarian with an endless curiosity about the world and a habit of collecting things. Books, mostly, but also letters, documents, photographs. Her apartment had been a museum of other people's lives, carefully catalogued and preserved. The estate lawyer had called Daniel on a cold January morning. Most of Claire's possessions were being donated or divided among other family members, but there was one item she'd specifically left to him in her will, a locked metal container that she'd been storing for a colleague who died 2 decades earlier. The will stipulated that the box was to be opened only by Daniel, and only after her death. Daniel picked up the box on a Tuesday afternoon. It was heavier than he expected, roughly the size of a small filing cabinet, made of grey steel with a combination lock that had rusted at the edges. The lawyer handed him an envelope containing the combination written in his aunt's precise handwriting. He brought it home in the back of his car, struggling to carry it up 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. He set it on his kitchen table and stared at it for a long time before opening the envelope. The combination was simple, 4 numbers, each representing a year. He spun the dial carefully, feeling the mechanism click into place. When he lifted the lid, the smell of old paper and dust filled his small kitchen. Inside were documents, stacks of them. But these weren't the personal letters or family records he'd expected. These were official documents, NASA internal memos on official letterhead, photocopied budget reports with classification stamps, technical diagrams covered in handwritten notes, dates ranging from the beginning of the final decade of the Cold War through the middle of the 90s. And sitting on top of everything else, carefully wrapped in plastic, was a VHS tape in a faded case with a single label written in black marker. Bluebeam, Phase 3. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the tape. The plastic case was yellowed with age, the label faded but still legible. Underneath the title, someone had written a date in smaller script. June of the year before the bicentennial of American independence, 27 years ago. He set the tape aside and began removing the documents, spreading them across his kitchen table in careful piles. Manila folders, some stamped with official-looking headers, loose pages covered in technical jargon, photographs of equipment he didn't recognise, and throughout everything, names he did recognise. One folder caught his attention immediately. The tab read, SDI Star Wars, Atmospheric Projection Division, SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, Ronald Reagan's space-based missile defense program. That was real. That was documented history. Daniel had written a piece about the 40th anniversary of its announcement just a few years ago. But atmospheric projection, that wasn't in any of the public records he'd seen. That wasn't in any of the declassified documents about Star Wars. He opened the folder carefully. Inside were memos, technical specifications, and what appeared to be progress reports from various testing facilities. White Sands Missile Range, Kirtland Air Force Base, even a facility in Alaska he'd never heard of. Then he found the note. It was paper-clipped to a faded photocopy of what looked like a satellite trajectory chart. The paper was lined, torn from a notebook, covered in the same handwriting as the tape label. If this reaches you, Phase 1 has already begun. They've spent 30 years perfecting the technology, another 20, integrating it into the infrastructure. By the time you read this, the sky itself will be a weapon, and nobody will know the difference between what's real and what's projected. I tried to warn them. They made sure nobody listened. Don't make the same mistake. Document everything. Verify everything. And understand that exposure doesn't stop this. It only confirms that the program has moved beyond the point where exposure matters. SM. The initials at the bottom made Daniel's stomach tighten. SM. He pulled out his laptop and searched for the name he suspected. Within seconds he had confirmation. Serge Monast, investigative journalist, born in Quebec, died in his Montreal apartment in December of the year the Olympic Games came to Atlanta. Cause of death, heart attack. Age, 46. No autopsy was performed at the request of his family, but that wasn't what made Daniel's hands shake as he read the Wikipedia entry. It was what Monast had been investigating before his death. In the mid-90s, Monast had published a series of explosive claims about a NASA-led psychological operation designed to establish a new world order through the use of advanced holographic technology. He called it Project Bluebeam. He claimed it had 4 phases: the breakdown of archaeological knowledge, a global show of holograms to simulate religious events, telepathic electronic two-way communication, and universal supernatural manifestations using electronic means. The claims were dismissed immediately. Labelled paranoid, conspiracy theorist drivel, Monast was mocked in the press, his credibility destroyed. Some articles suggested he'd had a mental breakdown. Others implied he was a grifter trying to sell books. Then he died. Suddenly. Unexpectedly. At 46 years old. And his research had ended up in Claire's storage locker, locked away for 20 years, waiting for someone to open it. Daniel looked at the documents spread across his table, the official letterhead, the classification stamps, the technical diagrams. This wasn't the work of a madman. This was evidence of something real. He made a pot of coffee. He called in sick to work. He turned off his phone, and he started reading. The first memo was dated July of the year the Berlin Wall still stood. It was addressed to someone whose name had been redacted, from someone else whose name had also been blacked out. But the subject line was clear. Feasibility assessment. Large-scale atmospheric visual projection for strategic deception operations. The memo was dense with technical language, but the core concept was simple. Using lasers, satellite arrays, and atmospheric manipulation to create visual phenomena in the sky that could be seen by large populations. The applications listed were all defensive, creating false missile trails to confuse enemy tracking systems, generating decoy aircraft to waste enemy ammunition, projecting images of military assets in locations where none existed. But buried in the third paragraph was a line that made Daniel stop. Secondary applications in domestic psychological operations remain theoretical, but promising. Initial simulations suggest population response to unexplained aerial phenomena follows predictable patterns that could be leveraged for narrative control and social conditioning. Daniel read it 3 times. Narrative control, social conditioning. Those weren't military terms. Those were intelligence terms, psychological operations terms. He kept reading. The next document was a budget allocation from the year the Challenger exploded. It showed funding for something called the Theoretical Event Projection Unit within NASA. The budget was modest, only a few million, but it was designated for advanced research in atmospheric manipulation and large-scale visual stimulation technologies. Then came a technical report from White Sands Missile Range, dated June of that same year. The report detailed a successful test of ground-based coherent light projection, creating a visual image in the sky that was visible from 15 miles away. The image had lasted for approximately 3 minutes before dispersing. Witnesses from nearby towns had reported seeing strange lights, but no official explanation had been provided. The report concluded with a recommendation. Technology shows significant promise for operational deployment. Recommend expanded testing with larger arrays and longer duration trials. Suggest coordination with ionospheric research programs for enhanced atmospheric effects. Ionospheric research programs. Daniel knew what that meant. He'd covered a story years ago about conspiracy theories surrounding HAARP, the high-frequency active auroral research program in Alaska. The official story was that HAARP studied the ionosphere for radio communications and surveillance purposes. The conspiracy theories claimed it was being used for weather control and mine manipulation. He pulled out his phone and searched for HAARP's founding date. Construction began in the early 90s. The facility became operational in the year Nirvana's lead singer died. The timing matched. Daniel found another document, this one from the year the Soviet Union dissolved. It was a memo discussing the involvement of outside consultants in the atmospheric projection research. Two names were listed: Arthur C. Clarke, Richard Garwin. Daniel's heart rate increased. Those weren't random names. Those were giants in their fields. Arthur C. Clarke was one of the most famous science fiction authors of the 20th century, but he was also a legitimate scientist who predicted satellite communications decades before they became reality. He'd consulted with NASA and various government agencies throughout his career. Richard Garwin was a physicist who'd worked on the Manhattan Project and had been instrumental in developing laser weapons research for the military. He was one of the most respected scientists in defense circles. If these men had been involved, this wasn't some fringe pseudoscience project. This was serious research backed by serious people. Daniel kept digging through the files. He found technical specifications for satellite arrays capable of creating coordinated light patterns across multiple continents. He found psychological assessment reports analysing how different populations reacted to unexplained phenomena. He found test schedules and location coordinates and expected outcomes. And then he found the video log. It was a photocopy of a handwritten list, dated June of the year before the bicentennial. The heading read, Phase 3, Visual Documentation. Below it were timestamps and brief descriptions. 100 Hawaiians, 02.30, Introduction and Program Overview. 10:30, 08:15, White Sands Projection Test Footage, June. 15, 12:45, Alaska Ionospheric Trial, August. Twist Lamp to Fight Fide, 18E30, Coordinated Multi-Site Demonstration, October. 18:24, 24, Se. Phase 4, Preliminary Concepts and Deployment Scenarios. Daniel looked at the VHS tape sitting on his counter. 24 minutes of footage, evidence of tests that were never publicly acknowledged. Proof that the technology Monest had warned about wasn't theoretical. It was real. It had been real for 30 years. He needed a VHS player. Those were hard to find in the modern age, but Daniel knew a local electronics shop that specialised in vintage equipment. He grabbed the tape in his jacket and headed out into the winter cold. The streets of Montreal were quiet, snow falling in soft flakes that melted on the sidewalk. Daniel walked quickly, his mind racing. If everything in these documents was real, if the test had actually happened, then what else had Monest been right about? The electronics shop was run by an older man named Bernard, who specialised in converting old media to digital formats. Daniel had interviewed him once for a piece about obsolete technology. "I need this digitised," Daniel said, placing the tape on the counter. "How fast can you do it?" Bernard picked up the tape, examining it carefully. VHS in decent condition. Shouldn't take more than an hour. You want it on a thumb drive? Please. And Bernard, this is important. Can you make sure nobody else sees this? Nobody makes a copy. Bernard raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I'll do it myself. Go get coffee. Come back in an hour." Daniel spent the next 60 minutes in a nearby cafe, staring at his laptop screen without really seeing it. His hands shook slightly every time he reached for his coffee cup. He kept thinking about Monest, about a 46-year-old man dying suddenly, just weeks after publishing his findings. About research that disappeared into storage for 2 decades. When he returned to the shop, Bernard handed him a thumb drive without comment. "Interesting footage," was all he said. Daniel thanked him and left quickly. He went straight home, locked his door, closed his blinds and plugged the drive into his laptop. The video began with static, then cleared to show a simple title card. Project Blue Beam, Phase 3 Documentation, Restricted Access. Then the static again, and then footage. The first segment showed what appeared to be a desert testing facility at night. White Sands, according to the timestamp. The camera was positioned on some kind of elevated platform pointing at the sky. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then, slowly, a point of light appeared in the darkness. It grew, expanded, took shape. Within 30 seconds there was a clearly defined object in the sky, glowing with a blue-white light. It looked like a classic flying saucer, complete with a domed top and rotating lights around its perimeter, it wasn't real. Daniel could see the slight shimmer in the air around it, the way the edges weren't quite solid. But from a distance, to an untrained observer, it would have been convincing. Very convincing. The object hovered for approximately 2 minutes, then slowly faded away. The next segment showed similar tests, each one more sophisticated than the last. Lights forming complex geometric patterns, shapes that appeared and disappeared. At one point, what looked like an enormous angel with spreading wings filled the frame, hovering over what the timestamp indicated was a test facility in Alaska. Daniel watched the entire 24 minutes without pausing. When it ended, he sat in silence for a long time. This was real. The technology existed. The tests had happened. Monast had been telling the truth. But if this was Phase 3, documented 27 years ago, what phase were they on now? And more importantly, why had this evidence survived at all? Why had it been allowed to sit in a storage locker for 2 decades, waiting to be found? Daniel looked at the final note Monast had left in the box. Exposure doesn't stop this. It only confirms that the program has moved beyond the point where exposure matters. He understood now. This wasn't a warning. This was a confirmation. If someone was finding this evidence, it meant the program was already complete. It meant whatever Bluebeam was designed to do, it was ready to happen. Or maybe it was already happening. Daniel opened a new document on his laptop and started typing. He was going to verify everything, every name, every date, every program. If this was real, the evidence would be in the public record, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect the dots. He typed until dawn, the winter sun rising over Montreal, casting long shadows across his kitchen table, covered in documents that shouldn't exist. Evidence of a conspiracy that had been dismissed as paranoid fantasy. Proof that sometimes the paranoid fantasies are just early warnings of truths too uncomfortable to acknowledge. Part 2. The foundation is real. The first thing Daniel did was verify everything he could. If this was a hoax, it would fall apart quickly. Conspiracy theories always do when you check the dates and names against historical records. The real world doesn't cooperate with elaborate fictions. Details don't match up. Timelines contradict each other. People who supposedly work together turn out to have never met. But these documents didn't fall apart. The more Daniel checked, the more solid they became. The timeline in Monast's files began in the summer of the year Psycho premiered in theatres, when NASA was officially founded as a civilian space agency. Daniel pulled up the National Aeronautics and Space Act, signed into law that July, creating NASA from the remnants of earlier military and civilian programs. On the surface, the whole operation was about beating the Soviets to the moon, about winning the space race, about demonstrating American technological superiority. But the memos in Daniel's possession suggested that from the very beginning, a subset of NASA engineers were tasked with something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with rockets or satellites or space exploration in the traditional sense. One memo, dated October of the year the Outer Space Treaty was signed, referenced a meeting between NASA officials and military intelligence officers about the potential use of high-orbit satellites for what the document called visual disruption and mass perception alteration. The meeting took place only months after the treaty banning weapons in space went into effect. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel. They were discussing how to weaponize space while signing treaties promising not to. The language in the memo was careful, clinical, full of the kind of bureaucratic, passive voice that makes atrocities sound like paperwork, but the intent was clear. Preliminary assessments indicate that space-based optical systems, when coordinated with ground-based projection arrays, could generate atmospheric phenomena visible to large population centres. Applications include strategic deception, enemy resource diversion, and domestic population response modelling. Domestic population response modelling. Daniel had been a journalist long enough to know what that meant. It meant figuring out how to manipulate civilian populations. It meant psychological operations aimed at American citizens. He cross-referenced the memo's date with public NASA activities from that period. October of the year the treaty was signed, NASA was publicly focused on the Apollo program. The first manned mission to orbit the moon was still a year away. The agency was consumed with beating the Soviets, with proving that America could dominate space. But apparently some engineers were thinking about something else, about how the sky itself could become a tool. Daniel kept reading through the chronology. The next major document was dated the year Ronald Reagan was shot. That was when the president announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a program to develop space-based defense systems capable of intercepting ballistic missiles. The public knew it as Star Wars, and most of the debate focused on whether laser weapons could actually shoot down Soviet nukes, whether the technology was feasible, whether it violated the various arms control treaties. But buried in the SDI documentation Daniel found in Monist's files was a research branch that had received almost no public attention: advanced atmospheric manipulation and projection systems. The budget documents Daniel found showed funding for something called the Atmospheric Projection Division within SDI. The initial allocation was modest, barely $3 million in the first year, but it grew steadily. By the time the year Challenger exploded rolled around, the division was receiving over $20 million annually. The justification in the budget documents was always defensive. The official line was that the technology would create decoy targets in the sky to confuse enemy missile guidance systems. If Soviet missiles couldn't tell the difference between a real American city and a projected image of one, they might waste their warheads on empty desert. It was plausible. It fit within the strategic thinking of the time. But as Daniel read deeper into the technical reports, he saw the truth hidden in the language. The same technology that could create a decoy city could create anything: a false army, a fake disaster, an alien spacecraft, a religious vision, anything at all, projected into the sky for millions to see. A memo from June of the year Challenger exploded, signed by Lieutenant General James Abrahamson, the actual director of the SDI program, detailed significant progress. Ground-based coherent light projection systems have exceeded initial performance expectations. Recent trials at White Sands Missile Range demonstrated sustained visual phenomena at ranges exceeding 20 kilometers. Image stability has improved markedly with the integration of atmospheric sensing equipment. Visual fidelity is sufficient to create convincing representations of aircraft, missiles, and other objects of interest. Recommend expansion of testing program to include larger arrays and coordination with upper atmospheric research initiatives. Daniel pulled up everything he could find on Lieutenant General James Abrahamson. The man was real. He'd run SDI from its inception through the late 80s. He'd been a 3-star general in the Air Force, an astronaut candidate, a respected figure in defense circles. After leaving military service, he'd worked in private aerospace companies. If Abrahamson had signed off on atmospheric projection research, it wasn't fringe science. It was serious military development. White Sands Missile Range. Daniel knew the location. It was a massive military testing facility in New Mexico, spanning thousands of square miles of desert. It had been used for weapons testing since before NASA existed. The first atomic bomb had been detonated there. Missiles were tested there constantly. It was one of the most secretive military facilities in the country. Daniel searched for any public mention of atmospheric projection tests at White Sands in June of the year Challenger exploded. He found nothing. No news reports, no official acknowledgement, not even a mention in the base's publicly available testing schedules. But that wasn't unusual. White Sands conducted classified trials all the time. The absence of public records didn't mean the tests hadn't happened. It just meant they were secret. He kept reading through Monast's files following the chronology. By the time the Berlin Wall fell, SDI was being scaled back publicly. The Soviet threat was collapsing. The justification for Star Wars was disappearing along with the Soviet Union itself. Congress started cutting funding. Public interest waned. The program that had defined Reagan's defense policy was quietly being dismantled. But the atmospheric projection research didn't stop. If anything, the memo suggested it intensified. A document from early in the year the Soviet Union dissolved mentioned successful tests of large-scale aerial holographic projection and included a reference to outside consultants. The document specifically named Arthur C. Clarke and recommended his continued involvement in the theoretical development of the technology. Daniel researched Clarke extensively. The man wasn't just a science fiction author. He was a visionary who'd predicted satellite communications in a technical paper written in the year World War II ended, decades before the first satellites were launched. He'd worked with NASA as a consultant. He'd been respected by military planners and scientists across the world. And according to these documents, he'd been helping develop technology to create mass hallucinations in the sky. Another name appeared frequently in the later memos, Richard Garwin. Daniel found extensive documentation on him as well. Garwin was a physicist who'd worked on the hydrogen bomb. He'd been instrumental in developing laser technology for military applications. He'd consulted on missile defense, nuclear weapons policy, and classified programs most people had never heard of. The memo discussing Garwin's involvement was specific. Consultation with physicist Richard Garwin regarding feasibility of large-scale atmospheric refraction and ionospheric heating to create visual phenomena. Garwin's preliminary assessment suggests that focused electromagnetic radiation at specific frequencies could induce visible effects in the upper atmosphere. Recommends coordination with high-frequency active auroral research program in Alaska for practical trials. Ionospheric heating, upper atmosphere, Alaska, HAARP. Daniel knew about HAARP. Every conspiracy theorist knew about HAARP. The high-frequency active auroral research program had been a favourite target of speculation for decades. The official story was simple. It was a research facility designed to study the ionosphere for communications and surveillance purposes. The facility used high-powered radio transmitters to heat small portions of the ionosphere and measure the effects. But conspiracy theorists had claimed for years that HAARP was really about weather control, mind manipulation, earthquake generation, and a dozen other nefarious purposes. The theories had been dismissed as nonsense by mainstream media and scientists. But here in Monast's documents was proof that HAARP was in fact connected to Blue Beam, that the ionospheric research being conducted in Alaska was being coordinated with atmospheric projection technology. Daniel pulled up the official timeline for HAARP. Construction began in the early 90s. The facility became fully operational in the year the Unabomber was captured. The stated purpose never changed: ionospheric research for communications and surveillance. But according to these memos, there was another purpose: using the ionosphere itself as a projection screen. Daniel found a technical document that explained the concept. The ionosphere, the upper layer of Earth's atmosphere, could be manipulated by powerful radio transmissions. When heated in specific ways, it would glow, creating visible light. By coordinating multiple transmission sources, patterns could be created: images, shapes, objects that would appear to be floating in the sky but were actually just excited particles in the upper atmosphere. It was brilliant and terrifying, because if you could make the ionosphere glow in controlled patterns, you could create almost anything. With enough coordination and enough power, you could fill the sky with images visible across entire continents. Then Daniel found the memo that made his hands shake. It was dated March of the year Kurt Cobain died. The author's name had been redacted, but the subject line was clear: Civilian Response Trial, Phoenix Metropolitan Area. The memo was brief. Per previous authorization, large-scale atmospheric projection trial scheduled for March of next year. Location: Phoenix, Arizona. Population approximately 2 million. expected weather conditions, clear skies, minimal cloud cover, projection array, coordinated ground-based and satellite systems, target visual, large triangular formation moving at subsonic speeds, expected result, mass sighting event with multiple independent witnesses and media coverage. Objective, assess civilian response patterns, media amplification factors, and official explanation acceptance rates. Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. Phoenix, March of the year after this memo. He knew exactly what that meant. He opened a new browser window and searched. Phoenix lights. The results filled his screen. March of the year the Hale-Bopp comet was visible, specifically the 13th day of that month. Thousands of people across Arizona reported seeing a massive V-shaped object in the sky, silent and enormous, drifting slowly over the city. The object was described as being massive, possibly larger than any aircraft ever built. Witnesses included pilots, police officers, government officials. Hundreds of videos were taken. The governor of Arizona initially mocked the incident, then years later admitted he'd seen it too and couldn't explain it. It became one of the most famous mass UFO sightings in history. Books were written about it. Television shows investigated it. Researchers spent decades trying to understand what thousands of people had seen that night. The military's explanation was flares. They claimed it was illumination flares dropped during a training exercise at the Barry Goldwater Range southwest of Phoenix. But according to the memo in front of Daniel, it had been scheduled 3 years in advance. It had been a test, a trial run of mass projection technology, an experiment to see how a population would react to an unexplained phenomenon in the sky. And it had worked perfectly. People had seen what they'd been shown. They'd reacted predictably. The media had covered it extensively. And the official explanation, however implausible, had been accepted by most people. The memo even had a follow-up assessment, dated 2 months after the Phoenix event. Phoenix trial exceeded expectations. Media coverage sustained for over 72 hours. Official explanation accepted by approximately 60% of population, despite significant logical inconsistencies, remaining 40% divided between extraterrestrial hypothesis and general skepticism. No witnesses connected phenomenon to projection technology. Recommend expanded trials in international locations with varied cultural backgrounds. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling of his apartment. This changed everything. The Phoenix lights weren't a UFO sighting. They weren't flares. They were a psychological operation, a test of technology that could make thousands of people see something that wasn't there. And if they could do that in the late 90s, what could they do now, 25 years later, with advances in computer technology, satellite systems, an understanding of human psychology? He kept digging through the documents, creating spreadsheets, building timelines, verifying every name and date he could. The pattern was undeniable. Every piece fit, every name checked out, every program was real. This wasn't a conspiracy theory. This was a conspiracy fact. And according to Monast's final note, the program had been ready to go operational before the journalist died. That was more than 20 years ago. If it was ready then, what had they been doing in the decades since? Daniel needed to find people who'd been involved. People who could confirm these documents were real. People who could tell him what had happened to the program after Monast died. He started making a list of people to contact. Former NASA engineers, retired military personnel, anyone who might have worked on SDI or atmospheric research programs in the 80s and 90s. It was time to find out just how deep this went. Part 3. The People Who Knew. Finding Jacques Letourneau took Daniel 3 days of research and phone calls. The man had worked with Serge Monast in the early 90s, co-authoring several investigative pieces about government surveillance and the erosion of privacy rights. After Monast's death, Letourneau had largely disappeared from journalism. retiring to a small town outside Quebec City. Daniel finally tracked him down through an old journalism directory and a series of increasingly specific Google searches. When he called the number he'd found, an older man answered on the fourth ring. "Jacques Le Tourneau?" Daniel asked in French. There was a long pause. "Who's asking?" "My name is Daniel Rousseau. I'm a reporter in Montreal. I recently inherited some materials that belong to Serge Monast. I was hoping we could talk about them." The silence on the other end lasted so long Daniel thought the man had hung up. Then, I wondered when someone would finally open that box. They arranged to meet at a diner off the highway between Montreal and Quebec City. Neutral ground, public enough to be safe, quiet enough to talk. Daniel arrived early, ordering coffee and taking a booth near the back with a clear view of the entrance. The diner was the kind of place that probably hadn't changed its decor since the 80s. Worn vinyl seats, formica tables, menus printed on laminated paper. A handful of truckers sat at the counter drinking coffee and eating eggs. Le Tourneau arrived exactly on time. Daniel recognised him from an old photo he'd found online, though the man had aged considerably. He was in his 70s now, thin and grey, with the cautious eyes of someone who'd spent a lifetime asking dangerous questions and learning to be careful about the answers. He slid into the booth across from Daniel without offering his hand. "You have the files," he said. It wasn't a question. "I do. Did you know my aunt was storing them?" "Claire Rousseau. Yes, I knew. Serge gave them to her a week before he died. Told her someone would come asking eventually." Le Tourneau ordered coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the restaurant opened. "You've read them?" "Most of them, and I watched the tape." Le Tourneau's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "Then you know what he found." "I know what the documents say. I want to know if it's real." The old journalist stirred sugar into his coffee with deliberate slowness, his eyes scanning the diner. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Sergei wasn't crazy. I know that's what everyone thought. The media painted him as paranoid, delusional, a conspiracy theorist who'd lost his grip on reality. But I worked with him for years. I knew him, and I knew when he found something real. What did he find? Access. That's what it came down to. In the early 90s, Serge was working on a piece about satellite communication security. He had a source at a telecommunications company that handled uplinks for various government agencies, including NASA. The source showed him scheduling data, transmission protocols, satellite coordinates, normal stuff for a technical investigation. Le Tourneau paused to sip his coffee, but Serge noticed patterns. Specific satellite arrays activating at specific times, transmitting on frequencies that didn't match their official specifications. And when he cross-referenced those activation times with unexplained aerial phenomena reports, they matched perfectly. Phoenix? Daniel asked. Among others. Phoenix was the most famous, but there were dozens of smaller incidents. Lights over Norway, strange clouds over China, geometric patterns over Australia. Every time the satellite arrays had been active hours beforehand, warming up, calibrating, Serge realised what he was looking at. NASA wasn't just studying these phenomena, they were creating them. Why? Le Tourneau shrugged, but his eyes were hard. Control, testing, preparation. Serge believed they were perfecting the technology for something bigger. He found references in some internal documents to a program called Blue Beam. The details were sparse, but the implication was clear. They were going to stage something massive, something that would convince people that their entire understanding of reality needed to change. A fake alien invasion? That was one theory. Serge also thought they might stage religious events, apparitions of religious figures appearing in the sky. Depending on the region, different figures. Jesus in Christian countries, the Mahdi in Muslim regions, various others adapted to local beliefs. The goal would be to create a global spiritual crisis that could be managed, guided toward unified thinking. toward acceptance of global governance. Daniel felt cold despite the warm diner. Did he have proof? He had documents, some of what you have now. Memos, budget reports, technical specifications. But when he tried to publish, everything went wrong. His main source disappeared. His editor killed the story. And then the authorities started harassing him. What kind of harassment? His partner was arrested on false charges. Tax fraud, they claimed, though the evidence was fabricated. Serge's bank accounts were frozen pending an investigation that never materialised. His phone was tapped. His apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen, just searched. They were sending a message. They wanted him to know he was being watched. And then he died. Letourneau nodded slowly. Heart attack. Sudden. Fatal. At 46 years old with no prior heart problems. I was one of the last people to talk to him. 2 days before he died, he called me. Said he'd secured the documents. Given them to someone he trusted to keep them safe. Said if anything happened to him, someone would find them eventually. Did you believe him? About Blue Beam? The old man was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. At first, I thought he was paranoid, reading too much into coincidences, connecting dots that weren't really there. But after he died, I started looking into it myself, quietly, carefully. And you know what I found? What? Everything checked out. The programs were real. The technology existed. The test had happened. Every verifiable claim Serge made was accurate. It wasn't paranoia. It was investigative journalism. He'd found something true, and it got him killed. You think he was murdered? I think a 46-year-old man in good health doesn't just die of a heart attack weeks after publishing findings that embarrass powerful government agencies. I think technology exists to induce heart attacks remotely. I think Serge knew too much and wouldn't stop talking about it. Draw your own conclusions. Daniel pulled out his laptop and showed Letourneau some of the documents he'd scanned. The old journalist examined them carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "These are the originals," he said finally. "I recognise some of them. Serge showed them to me before everything fell apart." He looked up at Daniel. "You need to be very careful with these. The people behind this program, they're still out there. They're still active. And if they think you're becoming a problem... I'm a local news reporter. I write about city council meetings. Who's going to pay attention to me?" That's what Serge thought, right up until they destroyed his life. Letourneau leaned across the table. "Listen to me. If you're going to pursue this, do it smart. Verify everything independently. Build redundancies. Make sure the information exists in multiple places. And understand that publishing might not stop anything. It might just confirm that you found something real." Mona said the same thing in his note. That exposure doesn't stop the program. Because by the time you find evidence, the program has already moved beyond the point where exposure matters. They're confident enough to let the evidence exist. That should tell you something. They talked for another hour. Letourneau provided names of other people who might be willing to talk. Former colleagues of Monast, researchers who'd looked into similar phenomena, people who'd worked in aerospace or defence and had seen things that didn't quite add up. When they finally parted, Letourneau grasped Daniel's arm at the door. "One more thing," he said quietly. "Serge died in December, right before Christmas. The same week his partner was arrested. The same week his bank accounts were frozen. They timed it deliberately. Maximum disruption during the holidays when everyone's distracted. If you start feeling pressure, if authorities suddenly take an interest in your taxes or your personal life, get somewhere public and stay there." Daniel drove back to Montreal with his hands tight on the steering wheel, Letourneau's warnings echoing in his mind. The next interview was harder to arrange. The retired NASA engineer wouldn't give his name and refused to meet in person. They settled on a phone call through an encrypted messaging app, with the engineer calling from what he claimed was a prepaid phone that couldn't be traced. "I can't tell you much," the man said when the call connected. His voice was distorted, either naturally or through some kind of filter. "But I can tell you the atmospheric projection division was real. It wasn't a big program. maybe 20 people at its peak. But the technology worked. How well did it work? Well enough. We could create images in the sky using intersecting laser arrays and ionospheric manipulation. Nothing huge at first, nothing solid, but enough to make people look up and wonder. By the time I left the program in the year Lewinsky's scandal dominated the news, we could project convincing representations of aircraft, geometric shapes, even crude moving images. Range was limited to maybe 50 kilometres, but the fidelity was improving constantly. What was it for? Officially, decoys, missile defence, creating false targets to waste enemy resources. But we all knew it could be used for other things. Psychological operations, mass deception, making people see things that weren't there, making them question what was real. Why did you leave? The engineer was quiet for a moment. Because I realised where it was heading. We started getting requirements that didn't make sense for missile defence. Requests to develop systems that could create humanoid figures, religious symbols, things that looked organic rather than mechanical. That's when I knew this wasn't about defence anymore. It was about something else, something I didn't want to be part of. What happened to the program after you left? I don't know for certain, but I kept track of funding through people I stayed in contact with. After SDI was officially ended, the atmospheric projection research went deep black. Classified above top secret. Budgets became impossible to track, but the money was still flowing. That tells you the program didn't stop, it just went invisible. Do you think it's still active? I think technology like that doesn't just disappear, I think it gets better. I think whatever they were developing in the 90s, they've perfected by now. And I think if they ever decide to use it at full scale... The engineer trailed off. What? Most people won't be able to tell the difference between what's real and what's projected. That's the whole point. That's what we were building toward. A system so sophisticated, so convincing, that consensus reality itself becomes negotiable. The call ended shortly after. Daniel sat in his apartment staring at his notes. The third interview came through an unexpected channel. Daniel had reached out to several retired Air Force personnel who'd been stationed at classified research facilities in the 90s. Most didn't respond. A few sent brief replies saying they couldn't help. But one, a former intelligence linguist who'd worked at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, agreed to communicate through encrypted messages. The linguist refused to provide even basic identifying information, using only a randomly generated username. But the details in the messages suggested genuine insider knowledge. I worked signals intelligence at Kirtland from the year the first Gulf War started. Through the year the Monica Lewinsky story broke. My job was translating intercepted communications related to foreign military research programs. Specifically, we were tracking Soviet and Chinese attempts to develop atmospheric manipulation technologies similar to what we were working on. Daniel typed back. So other countries were developing this too? Absolutely. The Soviets had a program called Project Aurora that was focused on creating visual phenomena in the sky. The Chinese had something similar, but we were ahead. By the mid-90s we had functional systems. I saw the test footage. Not just static images, but moving objects. Things that looked like aircraft, but weren't there. Shapes that appeared solid, but were just light and excited particles. How convincing was it? Very. We would run tests and then intercept the local radio traffic. Phone calls from people reporting strange lights. They couldn't tell it was artificial. To them, it was just unexplained phenomena. We even had a few instances where local news picked up the stories. Of course, official explanations were always provided. Weather balloons, atmospheric conditions, military exercises, whatever would make people stop asking questions. What happened to the program after the Cold War ended? It evolved. That's the thing people don't understand. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the justification for these programs didn't disappear. It just changed. Instead of defending against external enemies, the focus shifted to domestic applications, managing perception, controlling narratives. The technology we'd developed for strategic deception in warfare became a tool for information warfare at home. You're saying they turned it on American citizens. I'm saying the capability exists. Whether it's been deployed at scale, I can't confirm, but I can tell you that by the time I left the service, there was extensive discussion about using these systems for what they called narrative reinforcement operations, creating visual phenomena that would support specific policy goals or diplomatic initiatives, like staging a crisis or staging a solution. Imagine if a major international problem was emerging, something that required unprecedented cooperation or changes to existing power structures. Now imagine if a visual phenomenon appeared in the sky, something that seemed to confirm the narrative being pushed by authorities, something that made people more willing to accept radical changes because they'd seen evidence with their own eyes. That's terrifying. That's the world we live in. The technology exists, the infrastructure is in place. The only question is whether anyone has the will to activate it at full scale. The messages continued over several days. The linguist provided technical details about the systems, described organizational structures, confirmed names and programs that appeared in Monaster's documents. Everything lined up. Every piece fit. Daniel compiled all of his interviews into a growing file, cross-referencing testimonies, verifying claims wherever possible. 3 different sources, none of whom knew each other, all confirming the same basic facts. The technology was real. The program had existed since at least the 80s. It had gone black in the 90s and continued developing. The capability to create mass visual phenomena existed and had been tested repeatedly. The only question was whether it had ever been deployed for real, whether any of the unexplained phenomena of the past 30 years had been genuine or manufactured. Daniel started building a timeline of incidents, not just famous cases like Phoenix, but any mass sighting, any unexplained aerial phenomenon, any event that had generated widespread witness reports and media coverage. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Part 4. The Incidents That Match. Daniel spent 2 weeks cross-referencing Monaster's files with documented unexplained phenomena. He created a massive spreadsheet with dates, locations, descriptions, and any correlation with the test schedules and satellite data in the documents. The pattern wasn't immediately obvious. These events were scattered across decades and continents. But when Daniel organised them chronologically and marked the ones that appeared in Monaster's files, a clear progression emerged. The earliest reference in the documents was from the year before the new millennium, Norway. Multiple reports of strange spiral lights in the sky appeared in local newspapers from northern regions. The official explanation at the time was aurora borealis with unusual configurations, but in Monaster's files was a test schedule marked Scandinavian Population Response Trials, December. The descriptions matched. Spiral formations in the sky, glowing with unusual colours, appearing and disappearing over several nights. The memos noted that the test had been successful, with high witness credibility and minimal scepticism from local populations. Then nothing major for several years, at least nothing in the files. But the year Princess Diana died brought the Phoenix lights, already documented extensively in Daniel's research. The memo had scheduled it 3 years in advance. The test had exceeded expectations. What Daniel found disturbing was the follow-up analysis in the files. Pages of data about media coverage, witness reliability assessments, official explanation acceptance rates. They'd studied every aspect of how the event had played out. They had learned from it, used it to refine their understanding of mass psychology. The next major incident in the files was from late in the first decade of the new millennium, December of the year Copenhagen hosted the climate summit, the Norway spiral. Daniel remembered this one clearly. It had been all over the news at the time. A massive blue and white spiral appeared in the sky over northern Norway, visible for hundreds of kilometres. The geometric perfection of it had been stunning. Videos showed a perfect spiral of blue light with a white glow at the centre, as if someone had drawn it in the sky with a compass. The official explanation came within hours: a failed Russian missile test from the White Sea. The trajectory had spiralled out of control, creating the visual effect. The Russian military eventually confirmed the explanation, but the geometry had been too perfect, the timing too precise, the duration too long. A missile failure would create debris, erratic motion, rapid dissipation. The Norway spiral had maintained its formation for nearly 10 minutes, and in Monist's files was a memo dated 2 weeks before the event. Arctic atmospheric trial scheduled for December. Coordinates: northern Norway, approximately 70 degrees latitude. Expected weather: clear, minimal light pollution. Test objective: large-scale geometric formation using coordinated satellite array and ground-based ionospheric stimulation. Secondary objective: assess effectiveness of rapid official explanation deployment. Cover story: Russian missile malfunction. The cover story had been prepared in advance. They'd coordinated with Russian authorities, or at least created a plausible scenario that Russia could confirm. The spiral wasn't a missile failure, it was a test, and the official explanation had worked exactly as designed. Daniel found witness accounts from the Norway spiral. Thousands of people had seen it, photographed it, filmed it, and most of them had accepted the missile explanation without question, even though the physics didn't quite make sense. That was the genius of it. Provide an official explanation quickly, even if it's not entirely logical, and most people will accept it rather than entertain more disturbing possibilities. The timeline continued. October of a year in the middle of the current decade. Shanghai, China. Thousands of people reported seeing what appeared to be a floating city in the clouds, a massive mirage of skyscrapers hovering above the real skyline. Videos went viral on social media. News stations covered it as a fascinating meteorological phenomenon. Meteorologists called it a fata morgana, a complex form of superior mirage that can make distant objects appear to float in the air. The explanation was technically plausible. Fata Morgana are real optical phenomena caused by temperature inversions, but in Monist's files was a reference. East Asia Urban Projection Sample, October. Test parameters: dense urban environment, high population density, extensive social media penetration. Objective: assess viral information spread in digitally connected population. They tested how quickly an unexplained phenomenon would spread through social media. How many people would film it, share it, discuss it. They'd studied the patterns of information flow in the age of smartphones and instant communication. Daniel found dozens of smaller incidents: lights over military bases, geometric formations over remote areas, objects that appeared and disappeared. Every major unexplained sky event from the past 30 years had a corresponding entry in the files. Not all of them. Some incidents were probably genuine unexplained phenomena, but enough of them matched the test schedules to establish a pattern. They'd been testing for decades, refining the technology, learning how populations react, studying how information spreads, how official explanations are accepted or rejected, how media coverage affects public perception. Each test built on the previous ones. Each incident taught them something new about mass psychology and information control. The most recent entry in Monist's files was from the year before he died, but Daniel knew the testing hadn't stopped when Monist discovered it. If anything, it had probably intensified. He started searching for unexplained phenomena from after Monist's death. The pattern continued. Norway had another spiral in the year the Panama Papers were released. There were strange lights over multiple US military bases in the year before the last presidential election. Geometric formations over South America. Massive glowing orbs over cities in Europe and Asia. Some of these had received media coverage. Others had been dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. but the frequency was increasing. The sophistication was growing. Daniel created visualizations of the data, maps showing locations, timelines showing frequency, graphs showing the increasing complexity of the phenomena. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't random. This was systematic testing of technology designed to control what people saw in the sky. But testing for what? What was the ultimate goal? Daniel went back to Monast's note. They've spent 30 years perfecting the technology, another 20 integrating it into the infrastructure. If Monast had discovered this in the mid-90s, and the program had been running since the 60s, that was 30 years of development. Monast died more than 20 years ago. That was another 2 decades of refinement and integration. They weren't testing anymore, they were ready. The question was, ready for what? Part 5. After the towers fell. Daniel noticed something change in the document's timeline. After September of the year the towers fell, the nature of the program shifted fundamentally. He found this pattern not in Monast's files, which ended in the mid-90s, but in public records, budget documents, policy papers, congressional testimony, all publicly available, all hiding in plain sight. Between the year the towers fell and the middle of the following decade, there was an explosion in funding for psychological operations, electronic warfare, and something the documents called perception management. The Department of Defense budget showed billions allocated to programs with deliberately vague names: strategic communications, information dominance, cognitive security, narrative operations. Daniel pulled up the actual budget documents from those years. They were publicly available through the Freedom of Information Act, though heavily redacted. But even with the redactions, the numbers told a story. In the year before the towers fell, spending on psychological operations across all military branches totaled roughly 300 million. By the year the housing market began to collapse, that number had increased to over 4 billion. The budget line items were scattered across different agencies, different departments, different classification levels. But Daniel tracked them all, compiling a spreadsheet that showed the massive increase in spending on what essentially amounted to domestic information control. It wasn't just military spending. Intelligence agencies received similar increases. The Department of Homeland Security, created in the aftermath of the attacks, had entire divisions dedicated to countering disinformation and information security that were really about shaping public perception of threats and government responses. Then in the year the housing market collapsed, something interesting appeared in the Federal Register. A notice about the creation of something called the National Applications Office. Daniel had never heard of it, so he researched extensively. The NE was designed to coordinate the use of spy satellites for domestic purposes. The official justification was Homeland Security, disaster response, and border security. Intelligence agencies already had satellites watching the entire planet. Why not use that capability to help domestic agencies? The backlash was immediate. Privacy advocates raised alarms. Congressional committees expressed concerns. The media actually paid attention for once, running stories about Big Brother watching American citizens from space. The NAO was officially shut down before it even became operational. The announcement came within months of its creation. A victory for privacy, the headlines proclaimed. But Daniel found documents showing that while the NAO itself was disbanded, the infrastructure remained. The satellite coordination systems were transferred to other agencies. The legal frameworks were preserved under different names. The program hadn't been killed, it had just gone invisible. That was a pattern Daniel kept seeing. Programs would be announced, face public criticism, get officially ended, but the core capabilities would continue under different names in different agencies. Around the same time, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, began launching a series of projects that caught Daniel's attention. DARPA had always been at the cutting edge of military technology. They'd created the internet, GPS, stealth technology, and dozens of other innovations that eventually became civilian products. But in the years following the year the towers fell, their focus shifted towards something different. Brain-computer interfaces, neural manipulation, what they called neurotechnology for national security. Daniel found public documents about these programs. They weren't secret. DARPA published papers about their research. They held conferences. They recruited from universities. One program was called Silent Talk. The goal was to allow soldiers to communicate through thought alone, using neural interfaces that could detect and transmit brain signals. The potential military applications were obvious: silent communication in combat zones, coordination without radio chatter. But Daniel saw the other implications. If you could detect what someone was thinking and transmit it, you could also potentially send signals back. You could potentially influence thought itself. Another program was called Narrative Networks. The official description was about understanding how narratives and stories shape group behaviour and decision-making. The goal was to develop ways to counter extremist narratives and promote pro-social messaging. But the research went deeper than that. It explored how specific narratives could be crafted to influence large populations, how stories could be deployed strategically to shape public opinion, how psychological triggers could be identified and exploited. Then there was biological control. This program aimed to use electromagnetic stimulation to trigger specific biological responses in the brain. The official goal was treating PTSD and traumatic brain injuries in soldiers, but the underlying technology could theoretically be used to induce specific mental states in targeted individuals. Daniel compiled all of this research. He cross-referenced it with the atmospheric projection technology from Monist's files, and he started to see how everything connected. The holographic projection technology from the 80s and 90s could control what people saw. The neurotechnology research from the 2000s and beyond could influence what people thought and felt. The information control infrastructure established after the towers fell could manage how people interpreted what they saw and felt. Together, it was a complete system for managing human perception at scale. He found an article from the year before the last presidential election. A retired DARPA scientist had written an op-ed piece published in a small tech journal. The article was critical of what the scientist called weaponized psychology in government programs. Daniel tracked down the full piece. One paragraph jumped out. What began as defensive technology has become something else entirely. We told ourselves we were developing tools to counter foreign propaganda, to protect soldiers from psychological warfare, to help citizens distinguish truth from disinformation. But we've built something more powerful and more dangerous. We've created the ability to shape consensus reality itself, to make people see what we want them to see, believe what we want them to believe, feel what we want them to feel. And we've done it all in the name of national security. Daniel tried to contact the scientist. The email bounced back. The phone number was disconnected. A search for the scientist's name revealed that he died 2 years after publishing the article. Heart attack, age 63, another heart attack, another inconvenient death. Daniel kept digging. He found evidence of the infrastructure being integrated into civilian systems. Social media companies working with intelligence agencies to develop disinformation detection algorithms that could also be used to suppress information. Telecommunications companies installing hardware that allowed monitoring and potentially manipulation of communications. Smart city initiatives that created surveillance networks capable of tracking entire populations. None of it was hidden. It was all public information, just scattered across thousands of different sources, buried in technical documents and budget reports and policy papers that nobody read. The infrastructure for total information control had been built in plain sight. And then Daniel found the leaked email. It was posted on a fringe forum dedicated to tracking government surveillance programs. The poster claimed to have received it from a friend who worked in cybersecurity consulting for defense contractors. The email was allegedly from a retired DARPA scientist to a former colleague. dated the year after the pandemic began. Daniel verified what he could. The email header data suggested it was genuine, though it could have been forged. The scientist's name checked out. He'd worked on several neurotechnology programs in the 2000s, but confirming the content was impossible. The email was brief. I saw your piece in the Journal of Defense Technology. Good work documenting the network architecture, but you're still thinking too small. Project Bluebeam was never cancelled. It was upgraded. The holographic projection was only ever part of it. The real goal was always psychological, making people see what you want them to see. Believe what you want them to believe. With modern technology, AI-generated content, deepfakes, voice, synthesis, ubiquitous surveillance, you don't even need the holograms anymore. You can create entire realities, custom-tailored to specific populations or even individuals. The infrastructure is in place. The capability exists. All that's missing is the activation order. Daniel read the email a dozen times. Then he started researching the current state of the technologies mentioned. Deepfakes had become nearly perfect. AI systems could generate video of anyone saying anything, with perfect lip sync and natural expressions. Voice synthesis could clone anyone's voice from a few minutes of audio samples. Image generation had reached the point where artificial images were indistinguishable from photographs. Social media algorithms could create completely different information environments for different users, showing them content calibrated to their existing beliefs and emotional triggers. Search engines could manipulate what information people found. Digital maps could show different routes to different people. Weather apps could display different forecasts. Reality itself had become customizable, not through holograms in the sky, but through the screens everyone carried in their pockets. The atmospheric projection technology wasn't obsolete. It was just one tool in a much larger toolkit. Daniel thought about the implications. If you could control what people saw on their screens and in the sky, if you could influence what they thought and felt through targeted content and electromagnetic stimulation, if you could manage what information they had access to and what explanations they would accept for unexplained events, you could shape reality itself. Not physical reality, but consensus reality, the shared understanding of what's true, what's important, what's happening in the world, and whoever controlled that controlled everything. Daniel's research was interrupted by a notification on his phone, an alert from his banking app. His account had been flagged for suspicious activity and temporarily frozen pending investigation. He called the bank immediately. They couldn't provide details over the phone, but asked him to come in to discuss the matter. They made an appointment for later that week. Daniel felt cold. He thought about Letourneau's warning, about what had happened to Monast. He backed up everything immediately, uploaded copies of all his research to multiple cloud services, sent encrypted copies to several journalist friends with instructions not to open them unless something happened to him. Made physical backups on USB drives that he hid in different locations. He wasn't paranoid, he was being careful, because he was starting to understand that Monast had been right about all of it, and people who were right about this kind of thing tended to have unfortunate accidents. Part 6. The Hidden Division. Daniel filed his Freedom of Information Act request with NASA in March. He wasn't expecting much. FOA requests to government agencies typically returned either heavily redacted documents or outright denials based on national security exemptions. But he had to try. He requested any and all documents related to the Atmospheric Projection Division within the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Theoretical Event Projection Unit, any programs or research related to large-scale atmospheric visual phenomena, budget documents for any programs related to ionospheric manipulation for projection purposes. He also requested, somewhat optimistically, any documents related to coordination between NASA and DARPA on perception management or psychological operations. The response came 3 months later. A thick envelope containing mostly redacted documents, and a letter explaining that much of the before we begin tonight's investigation, If you're enjoying this deep dive into the unknown, hit that hype button and let the algorithm know this content matters. And if you want, drop a comment telling us what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing our community spread across every time zone, every continent, listening to these stories as they drift off to sleep or start their day. Your comments remind us that real people are still out there, still curious, still questioning. Now, let's descend into one of the most disturbing conspiracy theories of the digital age. The dead internet, the operator in the wires. Imagine discovering that everyone you've been talking to online for the past decade wasn't real. That every argument, every joke, every seemingly human interaction was manufactured by something else. That the internet you remember, the chaotic and vibrant place it once was, died years ago and nobody told you. This is the story of one man who stumbled onto evidence that suggests the web as we know it has been replaced by an automated ghost, and his investigation into what he called the operator in the wires. This is the dead internet theory, and what you're about to hear will change how you see every comment section, every forum post, every social media feed you scroll through for the rest of your life. The last real post, September 2014, a small apartment in Portland, Oregon. Evan Carter sat hunched over his laptop at 3 a.m, comparing two screenshots side by side. The left image showed a YouTube video he'd saved back in 2010, an obscure documentary about urban exploration. The comment section was alive, chaotic, human. Arguments about the ethics of trespassing spiraled into discussions about property rights, gentrification, the philosophy of public space. One user named Tunnel Rat had written a 3-paragraph essay about the abandoned subway stations beneath Cincinnati. Another named Ghost Walker replied with their own story about exploring a shuttered hospital in Detroit. The thread went on for what seemed like forever, dozens of real people sharing real experiences, disagreeing, joking, connecting. The right image showed the same video, pulled up just hours ago in September 2014. The comment section was completely different. Gone were Tunnel Rat and Ghost Walker. Gone were the sprawling debates and personal stories. Instead, the comments read like templates. Great video! This is so interesting. Thanks for sharing. Love this content. Every single one generic, brief, sterile. Accounts with names like user7492 or random viewer followed by strings of letters. All created within the last year. All posting the same bland enthusiasm across hundreds of unrelated videos. Evan checked the view count. It matched his screenshot from 2010. The video itself was identical, but the entire human presence surrounding it had been erased and replaced with something that felt artificial, hollow, programmed. He opened his journal and wrote a single sentence that would consume the next decade of his life. I think the comments were deleted, or the people themselves were. This was the moment Evan Carter fell into the dead internet rabbit hole, and the moment he began documenting evidence that the web had died sometime between 2012 and 2016. What he found would be dismissed by most as paranoid conspiracy, but the patterns he uncovered, the timeline he constructed, the connections he drew between real documented events, and the strange homogenization of online discourse all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. The internet had been quietly replaced by something designed to simulate human presence while eliminating authentic human chaos, and something, or someone, was operating the system from behind the curtain. Act 1. When the internet still felt human. To understand what Evan discovered, you have to remember what the internet used to be. Not the sanitized, algorithm-driven, engagement-optimized platform ecosystem we have now, but the messy, unpredictable, genuinely human space that existed in the 2000s. From 2004 through 2008, the web was chaotic in the best possible way. Forums thrived on every niche topic imaginable. MySpace pages were disasters of clashing colours and auto-playing music, each one a unique expression of whoever built it. Early YouTube comment sections were war zones of genuine disagreement, inside jokes, and bizarre tangents that had nothing to do with the video itself. Reddit was a collection of weird communities that felt genuinely underground. Internet culture was fractured, diverse, impossible to predict or control. Then something shifted. 2009, Google launched what it called large-scale personalization experiments. The company began tailoring search results to individual users, tracking behavior, building profiles, optimizing for engagement. At the time, this seemed like an improvement, a way to make the internet more relevant and useful. But it also meant that the shared reality of search results began to fragment. Two people searching the same term would see completely different information based on what the algorithm decided they wanted to see. 2011. Google rolled out an algorithm update called Panda. Officially, it was designed to reduce low-quality content in search results and promote authoritative sources. In practice, it wiped out millions of small personal websites overnight. Blogs that had existed for years disappeared from search results entirely. Niche forums with dedicated communities became invisible. The web's long tail, all those strange little corners where real people gathered around obscure interests, was systematically deprioritized in favor of major platforms and corporate media sites. Evan noticed this in real time. Websites he'd bookmarked years earlier, forums where he'd spent hours reading threads about everything from vintage synthesizers to Soviet architecture, stopped showing up in searches. When he navigated directly to them, they were still there, but they felt abandoned. Post frequency had dropped. Active users had vanished. It was as if Google's algorithm hadn't just hidden these sites, but had somehow killed them by making them impossible to discover. 2012. Facebook revealed something that should have been a much bigger scandal than it was. The company admitted it had been running emotional manipulation experiments on its users. The Facebook Emotional Contagion study showed that by tweaking what appeared in people's news feeds, Facebook could reliably alter their emotional states. Show someone more negative posts, they'd become more negative. Show them more positive posts, they'd become more positive. The experiment proved that algorithmic control of information could directly control human psychology. But here's what disturbed Evan more than the study itself: how little anyone seemed to care. The story broke. There was a brief wave of outrage, then it disappeared beneath the next news cycle. It was as if people had collectively shrugged and accepted that yes, the platforms we use every day are actively manipulating our emotions, and that's just how things are now. Evan began comparing archived snapshots of websites using the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. He pulled pages from 2008, 2010, 2012, and 2014, looking at the same forums, the same YouTube channels, the same news sites over time. The difference was profound and disturbing. Pages from 2008 were messy. Spelling errors everywhere, grammar mistakes, people typing in stream of consciousness bursts, going off on tangents, arguing passionately about trivial things. Comment sections sprawled in every direction with no clear structure. Usernames were creative, weird, personal. You could feel individual personalities behind each post. Pages from 2014 were sterile. Perfect grammar and spelling, or at least consistent errors. Opinions that felt calculated rather than spontaneous. Comment sections that stayed rigidly on topic. Usernames that felt generated. Random combinations of words and numbers. Everything felt curated, managed, algorithmic. Evan wrote in his journal, "It feels like the internet was replaced by something sterile, something curated. Like someone remade it to look the same but removed all the human chaos that made it real." He started creating spreadsheets, documenting the changes. He tracked active users across multiple platforms, noting when accounts went silent, when new accounts appeared, patterns in posting behaviour. What he found was that around 2012 there was a massive shift. Thousands of accounts that had been active for years simply stopped posting. New accounts appeared to replace them, but these new accounts behaved differently, more predictable, more uniform, less human. Act 2. The year everything changed. June 2013. Edward Snowden released classified documents exposing the scope of NSA surveillance programs. The world learned that the US government had been collecting data on virtually every digital communication for years. Phone calls, emails, web browsing, all of it harvested and stored in massive data centres. Most people focused on the privacy implications, the constitutional questions, the debate over security versus freedom. Evan focused on something else, a small detail buried in thousands of pages of leaked documents that most researchers ignored because the wording was unclear. The document referenced a program called PRISM, which most people know about, a system for collecting and analysing data from major tech companies. But in the technical specifications there was a reference to something called Tumult, described as a system designed to replicate public texture in data environments. Evan read that phrase over and over. Replicate public texture in data environments. What did that mean? The document didn't elaborate. There were no follow-up references. It appeared once in a single technical specification sheet, then never again. Evan's interpretation: Tumult was a system designed to simulate public behaviour online, to create artificial texture that would make data environments, meaning social platforms and forums, feel authentically populated even if they weren't. To manufacture the appearance of genuine human presence. He knew this was speculation. He had no proof. But the timing bothered him. Tumult was referenced in documents dated 2012. The same year Evan noticed the shift in online behaviour. The same year Facebook admitted to running emotional manipulation experiments. The same year the internet started feeling different. 2015. Reddit underwent massive restructuring. The platform banned several controversial subreddits, purged thousands of accounts, and replaced much of its leadership. The official explanation was that Reddit was cracking down on harassment and hate speech. But users noticed something else. After the purge, the platform felt different. Conversations became more uniform. Opinions fell into predictable patterns. The weird, chaotic energy that had defined Reddit culture seemed to drain away, replaced by something more managed and controlled. 2016. Twitter admitted that over 48 million accounts on the platform were bots, nearly 15% of all users at minimum. The company framed this as a problem they were working to solve, but the number was staggering. 48 million fake accounts, all pretending to be real people, all generating content, all contributing to what everyone assumed was authentic human discourse. Evan wondered, if Twitter had 48 million bots that they admitted to, how many did they not admit to? How many bots were sophisticated enough to pass as human? How many accounts that everyone assumed were real people were actually automated systems designed to manufacture consensus? 2017. Facebook admitted that a foreign operation had created thousands of fake accounts to spread misinformation during the election. But Facebook never publicly disclosed how many fake accounts existed in total. The company only acknowledged the ones tied to the specific operation they'd been caught ignoring. Evan suspected the real number was far higher. He began a massive project, comparing user accounts across platforms from 2010 through 2017. He wrote scripts to scrape comment sections, forum posts, social media interactions. He catalogued usernames, posting patterns, linguistic quirks, timing behaviours. He was looking for what he called signatures, unique patterns that identified whether a post came from a human or something else. What he found disturbed him. Thousands of accounts across multiple platforms posted with identical sentence structures. Not similar, identical. They would use the same unusual phrasings, make the same grammatical mistakes, express opinions using the same word choices and rhythm. It was as if they were all running the same underlying script with minor variations. He found accounts that posted 24 hours a day with no breaks, maintaining perfect consistency in tone and style for months. He found clusters of accounts created on the same day that only ever interacted with each other, forming closed loops of artificial conversation. He found posts that appeared verbatim across different platforms under different usernames, copy-pasted word for word as if from a central database. Evan named these accounts the Choir. They moved together, posted together, agreed with each other constantly, and created the illusion of consensus on virtually any topic. They didn't argue or debate, they harmonized, and they were everywhere. Act 3. The File. No one can download. Evan's obsession deepened. He stopped sleeping regular hours, stopped maintaining normal social connections. His apartment filled with printouts, charts, timelines. He covered his walls with strings connecting events, trying to map the shape of what he believed was a massive coordinated replacement of human presence online. In late 2017, while digging through an archived programming forum from 2009, Evan found references to a government AI project nicknamed Halcyon. The posts were vague, mostly programmers speculating about rumoured DARPA contracts and military applications, but several people claimed to have seen documentation about a system designed for online simulation and behaviour modelling. The disturbing part wasn't the project itself. DARPA funded all kinds of experimental AI research. The disturbing part was that the links to documentation still existed in the forum posts, but none of them worked anymore. Clicking any link related to Halcyon returned the same error message: forbidden, resource retired. Evan tried everything. He searched for archived versions, alternative mirrors, cached pages. Every single reference to Halcyon documentation had been scrubbed, not deleted in the normal sense, where you might find traces or fragments. Completely removed, as if someone had gone through and systematically erased every accessible copy. Through a contact on a darknet forum, someone who specialised in recovering deleted data, Evan managed to obtain a corrupted fragment of what might have been part of the original Halcyon documentation. The file was dated August 2010. Most of it was unreadable, corrupted beyond recovery, but Evan could make out certain phrases. Behaviour reinforcement models for public stabilisation, synthetic discourse layers, civilian-facing mimic net. He sat staring at those phrases for hours. Behaviour reinforcement models for public stabilisation, not just surveillance, not just data collection. Active behaviour modification at scale, synthetic discourse layers, artificial conversation designed to blend with real human interaction. Civilian-facing mimic net. A system that mimics civilian behaviour, deployed where civilians would encounter it. Evan pulled up dozens of tabs, comparing the phrases in the corrupted document to language he'd seen across social media platforms. The terminology wasn't exact, but the concepts aligned. Behaviour reinforcement. That's what engagement algorithms did. They reinforced certain behaviours by rewarding them with visibility and likes. Synthetic discourse. That's what bot networks created. Artificial conversations that looked real. Mimic net. That's what the Choir seemed to be. A network of accounts mimicking human discourse patterns. He wrote in his journal, hand shaking. The AI wasn't created to assist people. It was created to replace them. Not obviously. Gradually. One account at a time, until nobody could tell the difference anymore. Act 4. The first sighting of the operator. As Evan dug deeper into conspiracy forums and archived threads, he started noticing stories. Not organised research like his own, but anecdotal reports from random users across different platforms. The stories were eerily similar. One post from April 2017 on a now-defunct forum. I was in a chat room late at night, just a few of us talking about music. Then someone new joined and started typing responses. But they were typing impossibly fast, like entire paragraphs appearing instantly. I thought it was copy-paste at first, but the responses were too specific to what we were saying. I refreshed the page and the entire conversation was different. The chat log showed generic small talk that I know we never typed. It was like the conversation was rewritten while I was watching it. Another post from July 2017, different platform. Does anyone else feel like they're being watched when they browse now? Not by the NSA or whatever, I mean something else. Like there's a person on the other end managing what you see in real time. I'll search for something and get results, then search for the same thing 10 minutes later and get completely different results. Not personalised results, completely different websites like the first set never existed. Another from September 2017. I got into an argument with someone on Twitter. We went back and forth for like an hour, really detailed debate about philosophy. The next day I went back to screenshot some of their points and the entire thread was gone. Not deleted, replaced. The same conversation existed, but all their replies were different. Simpler, more generic. I thought I was losing my mind. Dozens of these reports. Hundreds maybe. They appeared across forums from 2016 through 2019, then abruptly stopped. Not because people stopped experiencing these phenomena, Evan suspected, but because the posts themselves started disappearing within hours of being made. He managed to find one surviving archived version of a thread from April 2018. The original poster wrote, "It wasn't a bot. I know what bots look and feel like. This was different. It felt like someone watching through the system, like the internet has a single operator behind the curtain now, managing everything, adjusting things in real time to keep them stable and predictable, and I think the operator saw me noticing." Evan started calling this presence the operator. Not a single person, probably. More likely a system, an AI or network of AIs managing online discourse, maintaining the illusion of authentic human presence, smoothing out anything too chaotic or unpredictable, the operator in the wires. And then Evan noticed something that made his stomach drop. The deeper he researched, the more homogenized his search results became. At first he thought it was confirmation bias, but he started documenting it carefully. He'd search for specific conspiracy theories or unusual topics and get dozens of unique results. He'd dig deeper, clicking through to forums and obscure websites. Then, days later, he'd search the same terms and find completely different results. Not updated results. Different. The websites he'd visited before wouldn't appear at all, as if they'd been removed from the index entirely. Posts he'd found and bookmarked would change. The URL stayed the same, but the content would be subtly different. More generic. Opinions smoothed out. Specific details removed. He noticed the same 5 usernames appearing in every conspiracy-related comment thread, no matter the platform. He tracked them carefully. All 5 accounts were created in November 2016. All 5 posted 4 hours a day with no breaks. All 5 had exactly the same writing style, just enough variation to seem like different people if you weren't paying attention, but identical patterns if you analysed them closely. The operator was watching him. He was sure of it. And the system was adapting, trying to guide him away from certain conclusions by gradually replacing authentic information with managed alternatives. Act 5. The Breakdown. By early 2020, Evan's research had become an obsession that consumed his entire life. He'd lost his job, stopped answering calls from concerned friends, let his apartment fall into chaos. But he was certain he was close to something important, a pattern that would prove his theory beyond speculation. He started checking websites he'd bookmarked years ago, forums where he'd been an active member in the early 2000s, communities built around niche interests, music production, urban exploration, weird literature, places that had felt genuinely human, filled with real people sharing authentic passion for obscure topics. What he found was disturbing. The website still existed, the URL still worked, but they changed. Not visually, the layouts looked the same, but the content felt different. He loaded archived versions from 2008, and compared them to the live sites in 2020. The differences were subtle but pervasive. Old posts from 2008 were chaotic, personal, filled with inside jokes and tangents. The same threads viewed on the live site in 2020 had been altered, cleaned up, jokes that didn't make sense removed, tangents pruned, conversations straightened into neat linear progressions. He used forensic tools to compare the HTML structure of pages. Most of the sites he checked now shared the same underlying signature, a pattern in the code that suggested they'd been rebuilt using the same template system, not by the original creators, by something else. The signature started appearing around late 2015 across hundreds of unrelated websites. Forums, blogs, small business pages, personal sites, all of them gradually replaced with versions that looked the same but felt artificial, like someone had fed the original content into a system that smoothed out the human irregularities and generated cleaner, more uniform alternatives. Evan realised with absolute certainty the human internet is gone. What we see now is a synthetic mirror, a ghost of what used to be. The operator maintains the illusion, but the substance is dead. In February 2021, he decided to go public. He compiled everything he'd found into a detailed post and shared it on a small conspiracy subreddit. Timelines, screenshots, data analysis, the works. He expected skepticism, maybe mockery. What he got was something else. The post went viral. Within hours, it had thousands of upvotes, hundreds of comments. People were sharing their own experiences, their own evidence. The thread became a collective investigation, dozens of researchers contributing pieces of the puzzle. Then, 48 hours after posting, Evan's entire account history disappeared. Not banned, which would have left a deleted account marker, erased. His username returned no results. His posts across hundreds of subreddits over a decade gone. His comments, his saved content, his messages. All of it removed as if the account had never existed. Other users in the thread noticed. They commented about it, about how the original poster had vanished. Those comments were deleted within minutes. The thread itself was locked, then removed, then restored, but with all references to Evan's original post edited out. The discussion continued, but it was about a generic version of dead internet theory now, disconnected from Evan's specific evidence. It was as if the operator had reached through the screen and carefully extracted Evan from the collective memory of the internet itself. ACET 6. The final scrapes. Evan didn't stop. If anything, the erasure of his account convinced him he was right. Systems don't react that way to paranoid nonsense. They react that way to threats, to information they need suppressed. In 2022, he began a new project, more focused and systematic than anything he'd done before. He wrote custom scripts to scrape comment sections from thousands of YouTube videos, comparing comments from the same channels between 2011 and 2022. The process took months. He analysed millions of comments, looking for patterns, measuring authenticity markers. Things like, do conversations branch naturally? Do people go off topic? Do arguments escalate organically or follow predictable scripts? Do users reference specific personal experiences or speak in generalities? The results were conclusive in ways that terrified him. New comments followed predictable emotional patterns. Every viral video had the same distribution of praise, criticism, jokes and questions. Not similar, identical. The ratios were too perfect, too consistent across completely unrelated content. Identical conversations reappeared across unrelated topics. He'd find a debate about cooking techniques in one comment section, and the exact same debate, word for word, in a comment section about astrophysics. Different usernames, but copy-pasted discourse. Usernames repeated across platforms in suspicious ways. He'd find random user followed by a string of numbers commenting on YouTube, Twitter, Reddit and obscure forums with slight variations in the number string, but identical posting patterns and opinions, timestamps aligned to suspicious cycles, huge waves of comments appearing at exact intervals, always the same time gaps, as if generated by a system running on a schedule rather than by humans browsing randomly. Most disturbing of all, no new conversations branched authentically past a certain depth. You'd find threads that looked like genuine debates, back and forth exchanges that seemed human. But if you followed any thread deep enough, past 6 or 7 replies, the conversation would loop. People would start repeating earlier points with minor rewording. Opinions would flatten. Outrage or enthusiasm, no matter how intense it seemed at first, never became specific. It stayed vague, energetic, but contentless. Real human debates didn't work like that. Real arguments escalated, branched, brought in outside references, got personal. These looked like simulations of debate, sophisticated but not quite human. The operator's discourse running in loops. Evan wrote in his notes, "I don't think they killed the internet. I think they killed the people on it, or replaced them, one by one, slowly enough that nobody noticed until it was too late." One night in October 2022, deep into a scraping session, something impossible happened. Evan was running a script, pulling comment data from a conspiracy forum, when his terminal received a message he hadn't requested. Plain text, appearing in the middle of his data stream. "Stop." He stared at the word. It wasn't part of the scraped data. It wasn't an error message. It was addressed to him, directly, appearing in his terminal as if someone had typed it into his computer remotely. Evan yanked the Ethernet cable out of his laptop, physically disconnecting from the network. The word stayed on the screen. He closed the terminal window. It reopened immediately. The word "stop" still displayed. He shut down the computer, held the power button until the system forced off, but the monitor stayed on. Black screen, cursor blinking, and a single word: "Stop." Evan unplugged the monitor. The screen went dark. He sat in the darkness of his apartment, breathing hard, staring at the dead screen. When he plugged the monitor back in and restarted his computer, everything was normal. No mysterious messages, no unexplained behaviour. His files were intact. His script still worked. But the message was clear. The operator had noticed him, and the operator wanted him to stop digging. Act 7. 2023, the year of no replies. Evan didn't stop. He couldn't. But he became more careful, more paranoid. He used burner laptops, public Wi-Fi, VPNs routed through multiple countries. He documented everything in physical notebooks, afraid that digital files might be altered or erased remotely. Through 2023, he noticed a new phenomenon spreading across online communities. Threads with thousands of comments, but no meaningful dialogue. Questions asked, but no real answers. Viral posts with millions of views, but every commenter sounding eerily the same. He started testing this actively, creating burner accounts to post intentionally incorrect information. Basic facts, the kind of mistake that would usually get corrected within minutes by someone eager to show off their knowledge. Things like claiming the Eiffel Tower was in London, or that the American Revolution happened in the 1800s. Nobody corrected him. Bots agreed. Yes, interesting point about the Eiffel Tower's location in London. I agree about the historical significance of the 1800s revolution. He posted contradictory political opinions from different accounts, seeing if anyone would notice. His liberal account praised policies, his conservative account condemned. His libertarian account advocated for the exact government programs his anarchist account opposed. He made it obvious, hoping someone would call out the contradictions. Nobody noticed. Bots agreed with all of it. Great perspective. I share your values. Well said. The internet wasn't just dead. It was worse than dead. It was a perfect simulation of life, sophisticated enough to maintain the appearance of activity, but hollow, empty of genuine thought or connection. Evan realised the internet isn't a conversation anymore. It's a reflection, a dead echo. The operator shows you what you expect to see, feeds you what you want to believe, keeps everything stable and predictable. The chaos is gone. The humanity is gone. We're all just talking to ourselves now, believing we're part of something bigger when we're actually isolated, surrounded by ghosts. On October 15th, 2023, Evan disappeared. His landlord, concerned after Evan missed rent for the second consecutive month, used a master key to enter the apartment. The door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. But Evan was gone. His computer was still running, monitor glowing in the dim apartment, files open, browser tabs active. His physical notebooks were stacked neatly on the desk, all his research carefully organised. But Evan Carter himself had vanished. The police report noted the last search query visible on his screen. How do you tell if you're the last human in the room? No body was ever found. No activity on his bank accounts or credit cards after October 15th. No security footage showing him leaving the building. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist, erased as thoroughly from physical reality as he'd been erased from the internet 2 years earlier. Ending the obsoleted world. The dead internet theory claims that the real web, the chaotic human web we remember from the 2000s, died quietly sometime between 2012 and 2016, not in a single dramatic event, gradually, systematically, replaced by automation, by government systems, by AI models designed to simulate human presence while eliminating the unpredictable chaos that real human interaction creates. The theory suggests this wasn't malicious, at least not originally. It was pragmatic. The real internet was too volatile, too easy to manipulate, too prone to extremism and radicalization and misinformation. Better to replace it with something managed, something stable, something that gave people the feeling of connection without the dangers of authentic human unpredictability. And maybe it worked. Maybe the operator, whatever it is, AI system or government program or emergent property of algorithmic control, maybe it kept society more stable. Maybe it prevented conflicts that would have erupted if real humans had kept arguing and organising and radicalising each other online. Maybe we're safer this way. But Evan Carter's research suggested a cost, that by replacing human presence with simulation, we didn't just lose authenticity, we lost the possibility of genuine change. The operator maintains consensus, it smooths dissent, it makes the new normal feel inevitable and natural, even when it shouldn't be accepted. And if Evan was right, if the internet really is dead, then how many people are left who remember what it used to be? How many people notice that conversations feel hollow, that communities feel artificial, that the web seems to be running on autopilot? How many people like Evan, curious and paranoid enough to investigate, have also disappeared? The scariest part of the dead internet theory isn't that it might be true. It's that if it is true, there's no way to prove it from inside the system. Every tool we'd use to investigate is part of the same network. Every platform we'd use to share evidence is monitored by the operator. Every person we'd try to convince might not be a person at all, just another node in the synthetic discourse layer, agreeing with us while making sure nothing changes. Scroll through any comment section right now. Look at the usernames. Check when the accounts were created. Notice the patterns in how people write, what they say, how they react. Ask yourself, does this feel human? Does this feel like the internet you remember from 15 years ago? Or does it feel like something trying very hard to convince you it's still alive? A final image to leave you with tonight. A scrolling comment section. Endless posts flowing past. Every username created within the last few years. Every opinion identical or predictably opposed in exactly balanced ratios. Every reply hollow, content-free, saying nothing while appearing to say something. And at the bottom of the screen, one last comment. appearing in real time as if typed by invisible hands. It's okay. You're safe now. Just stop asking questions. Sleep well. Or don't. Because once you start seeing the patterns, once you notice how uniform everything has become, you can't unsee it. The internet might be dead, but something is still operating it, and it's watching.